Please note that this meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. I welcome members of the press and the public who may be viewing this meeting remotely. We now move into the formal business of the meeting. Can we take the notice convening the meeting as read? Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, Mr Mayor, we have apologies from Councillors Butler, McDonough, D McKnight, Mullen, Nicholson, Noble, P Walker and Alderman Arnott, Forbes and Tate.
Are there any further apologies?
Thank you, Mayor Sullivan. You mentioned Colin Nicholson. He does hope to arrive later. That's true also of George Smith and Martin Haswell, who are running late. However, I'd like to give you apologies to Paul Gibson. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 15th of September 2021. Can we agree the minutes? Declarations of interest. Sorry.
Councillor Gibson.
Sorry, Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will ask members to turn to page 8 of the minutes, where they're voting for the before the council that day, and I appear to have voted twice. And I'm afraid I didn't vote twice. I voted against the motion being returned, but I'm down as voting in favour of the motion as well, Mr Mayor, and I think that was a Lib Dem. So I'd like that recorded in the minutes, Chair, Mr
We
Mayor.
put that right, Councillor Gibson.
It's Paul Gibson.
Councillor Gibson, I'm informed it's Paul Gibson.
No, it's P. Gibson in the minutes.
Yeah, Paul.
No, it's P. Gibson.
We'll make that clear.
We'll just make it clear in the minutes. So
We'll sort that. We'll sort that, Councillor.
Yeah, unless someone first names in.
It's a good point, Councillor Gibson. We'll put that right. Do members have any declarations of interest?
Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Walker.
Councillor Hodgson?
Yes, Mayor Sullivan, on the report of the Cabinet, item 4, on the Gambling Act, a close family member is a consultee, so I'll exclude myself from that item of the report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Walker?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Chairman, just also an item 4 the Cabinet proposed Gambling Act, as I will have Gambling Commission licence and work for a big operator, so I'll also be withdrawn during that item.
Thank you very much. Move on to announcements. Please note that in the event of a fire alarm being sounded, there is no test planned for this afternoon. Therefore, all instructions to evacuate should be treated as real. Please follow instructions given by the stadium staff. At the end of the meeting, can I please request that you all remain seated until you are given instructions to leave. Members are requested to wear face coverings during the meeting, which should only be removed when speaking at or standing at the mics, or using the mics at the table. They are asked to keep face coverings on unless they can observe a 2-metre distance. Could I please ask members to speak sufficiently loud and clearly so that others can hear the speeches? Please, if you notice any of our members moving around, going out without a mask, there are very good reasons for that. So please don't jump to conclusions if you see any member without a mask on. I'd like to thank those members who have given notice of their wish to speak. Where notice has been given, the member will be invited to speak at the appropriate time. If any member who hasn't given prior notice wishes to speak at any point during the meeting, they should please raise their hands to indicate and speak when invited to do so. It would also be of assistance if you could state your name. I would request that members endeavour to conclude the business on the agenda within the allotted 3-hour period. No arrangements have been made for the meeting to reconvene tomorrow, and we have a lot of business to deal with in the current circumstances. We should avoid having to convene a further meeting to deal with unfinished business. And please note that if I consider a matter is being sufficiently debated, I will restrict the number of speakers in order to get the business of the meeting concluded in one sitting. Moving on to awards, Councillor Farthing, I understand you have 2 awards to present to the Council. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, no one's given me the awards to bring, but they're both to do with our school's meals service, and they've done extremely well to win the 2 awards that they have been awarded. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, and we'll make sure those awards are presented to the right department and put on the right place to be displayed. Thank you very much. That concludes my announcements. I would like now to invite the Leader to provide an update to Council on the situation with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic. Leader, would you like to update the Council?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity again this afternoon to provide an update to Council on the current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic. When I last provided an update in September, we were 2 months on from the government's final step in the easing of COVID restrictions, and we all felt, I think, that we'd returned to something like normality and had been able to enjoy a really good summer in Sunderland. We'd once again hosted world-class events, including the British Tour Series cycling event, and we'd had announcement after announcement in terms of investments and fantastic progress with our ambitious regeneration plans for the city, with all of it being central to ensuring the city and its people recover from the pandemic in as strong and competitive position as possible. And the progress and announcements have continued into the autumn, with the opening of the Sunderland Strategic Transport Corridor Phase 3, linking Wessington Way to the city centre and the Riverside Sunderland site, the very successful return of the Festival of Light and Illuminations, and the return of key events celebrating the success and achievement of our city businesses and organisations. And it's on that note, Mr. Mayor, that I'll now turn to the current situation in relation to COVID-19. It goes without saying that this very determined virus hasn't gone away. We all know that, and therefore if we are to keep the city open and moving forward, our businesses open and building back, people going to work, school, college and university, and friends and family free to be with one another, then we must all keep on doing our bit. And there's the further very serious imperative for all of us to keep taking responsibility, individually and collectively, to prevent the transmission of the virus, now that we are well into autumn and heading for winter, and that is protecting the NHS and the care sector. Earlier than normal in autumn, as you will no doubt be aware, right across the country, including here in the North East, these vital services and the workforces who provide them are already under enormous pressure. As you would expect, our health and social care workers across the city are as dedicated as ever to doing the best job possible and to providing essential care, treatment and support to those who need it. And partner organisations are continuing to create joint, innovative solutions to what is an ever-increasing demand on services and resources. Our community networks and volunteers are still there as well, working tirelessly as ever, doing whatever they can to support families and individuals. Again, as winter draws on and people are really feeling all the compound effects of the past 20 months, they too are increasingly needed. Local government continues to shout loud to central government about the reality of not being out of the woods yet with this pandemic, and the fact that ongoing and indeed increased levels of support, both financial and in terms of policy, are going to be needed to achieve full and proper recovery and the levelling up promised. I am delighted to say that Sunderland is being heard and is being recognised as a place and a people who can be central to national recovery, growth and levelling up. But I can assure you the Council and our partners won't stop banging the drum and forging compelling plans to secure further government backing and, of course, other public and private sector investment in order to press ahead with delivering our city plan and creating a connected international city with opportunities for all. But we need everyone playing their part and pulling together at the same time. And for the sake of the more vulnerable members of our communities, the health and care sectors and their employees, our businesses, and indeed so that everyone in Sunderland can look forward to a better festive season this year, that means following current public health guidance and advice and doing the right things. Hands, face, space as appropriate is as important now, if not more important than ever, as it is everyone eligible taking up the offer of all vaccinations, doses and boosters by making an appointment or going to a walk-in clinic as soon as invited. Unfortunately, infection rates remain very high across the North East region and throughout the country, and people continue to suffer and very sadly in some cases die when falling ill with COVID-19. As I've said many times before, Mr. Mayor, doing everything we possibly can to prevent the spread of the virus and getting as many people as possible fully vaccinated, like we saw with your television appearance. Good man, Mr. Mayor, well done, is our best defence against COVID. And so my plea as ever to everyone in the city is please do the right things for ourselves, our loved ones, and for everyone around us. We've built up a fantastic momentum with the city's recovery from an extremely challenging period in everyone's lives. So let's keep it going and look forward to a great 2022 in Sunderland. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I'll conclude my update. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leader. Do any members wish to speak on the Leader's report? Can we note the update from the Leader? The next is the citywide approach to the carbon reduction, and I would like to invite the Deputy Leader to present an update to the Council on the citywide approach to carbon reduction. Deputy Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to update members regarding ongoing progress being made in relation to our carbon neutral goals. Key progress and development work in recent months includes the following. The first Young People's Advisory Group meeting took place on the 4th of October. The young people were asked to choose their own group name and rename the group Environmental, Green and Sustainable, EGS, and also voted for the new citywide hashtag #WeAreSustainable. 2 representatives from EGS attended the 2030 Shadow Board and got a great response from partners across the city as they shared details of their first meeting and what they would like to learn about and develop at future meetings. Still on engagement, out of over 100 applications, Sunderland was selected as one of 11 cities to take part in the European Covenant of Mayors Peer Learning Programme. Last month, Sunderland hosted an online 4-day event with Victoria Gastiez from Spain and Parma in Italy to share learning and experience. Topics discussed included transport, energy and green infrastructure, and Sunderland, as the designated expert city, led discussions on community and partner engagement, which culminated in our European partners participating alongside young people's representatives in October's citywide 2030 low carbon Shadow Boards meeting. A COP26 grant opportunity has also been circulated to Sunderland schools to encourage young people to design and get involved in a project that helps tackle climate change. A total of £2,600 has been given out to schools who applied for this grant across 6 secondary schools and 2 primary schools. We continue to stretch ourselves in terms of our ambition, and Sunderland has recently joined the city's Race to Zero campaign, a global campaign run by the COP26 presidency to become a part of a coalition to build momentum around the shift towards a decarbonised economy. We have also recently joined the Race to Resilience campaign to strengthen our commitments towards encouraging global climate action, as well as to build the resilience of our city against climate hazards. And we also continue to pursue external funding to support us in our delivery. In terms of recent funding awards, the Council has been awarded £45,000 from DEFRA's Local Authority Treescapes Fund. The focus for tree planting will be in urban areas. The Council has also just been awarded £20 million through the Levelling Up Fund to support the development of a Housing Innovation and Construction Skills Academy known as HICSA in the Riverside, Sunderland area. The HICSA facility will enable Sunderland to build the skill base needed to upgrade the city's homes using modern construction methods, low carbon, renewable energy and smart technology. The funding will also enable the creation of new sustainable communities in Sunnyside and on the Riverside, Sunderland. I hope this provides a useful and positive update on the work that is ongoing within the Council and with our partners. We will continue to provide updates to Council as appropriate going forward. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Leader, for the important item. Anyone wish to speak on this? No? Next, we move on to the reception of petitions. Do any members have any petitions to present?
Mr Mayor, through you, we've received prior notice from Councillors Haswell, George Smith, Paul Edgeworth and Councillor Nicholson. I don't know whether anyone's able to hand his petition in on his behalf. Councillor Mann.
Have you got anyone for Nicholson?
I don't think
No?
so. No.
Right. Councillor Haswell.
I think the Pallion petitions will be handed in after the meeting, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't pick that up.
Not as well isn't here either, so I think all the petitions from Pallion councils will come in after the meeting.
Okay. So Paul Edgeworth.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I have a petition from residents in Grindon, Thorny Close, Springwell and Hastings Hill, which reads, we, the undersigned, call on Sunderland City Council to make free domestic rodent control permanent and to put in place a long-term plan to tackle rat infestations in public places and local parks. Thank you.
Thank you. Is George with us? Councillor George Smith? You have a petition?
I've got a petition, I think, Councillor...
Can we see it afterwards?
Martin, I think, has got it.
So it's just
Fine.
That's one must have it, I think.
Yeah.
So George is not the one to hand in.
Right.
Must have it.
Right, we'll move on. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, Council and Governance, I am pleased to submit a petition on behalf of the Pallion Shipyard Partnership. The petition was generated via change.org and contains 2,534 signatures. We, the undersigned, members of Pallion Shipyard Partnership, residents of the City of Sunderland and the North East, and supporters, both nationally and internationally, urge Sunderland City Council to support the reopening of the Pallion Shipbuilding Yard. The Pallion Shipbuilding Yard, Sunderland, closed its doors for the final time on the 7th of December 1988. At that time, it was the largest covered shipyard in the world, with a capacity to build two 30,000-ton ships side by side in its dry dock. Steel went in one end and completed ships were floated out the other. It was also the most modern yard in the whole of Europe. Although long closed, the site, with its covered all-weather dry dock and building, still exists, mothballed, ready to be refurbished and reopened for business. With support and assistance from Sunderland City Council, a new operator would jump at the chance to reopen the site and commence offshore support services, dealing initially with repair and maintenance. The world-renowned shipbuilding firm Harland & Wolff has already investigated the potential of the Pallion Yard prior to their recent multi-million-pound purchase of the Appledore Yard in Devon. Pallion is a bigger, improved Appledore, both designed by Sir James Venus. Notwithstanding their reputation and interest, the company was sadly denied any support from Sunderland City Council and the Port of Sunderland Authority. North Sea offshore renewable energy business is booming and is set to continue an upward trend into the future. That business requires ships and associated equipment, which require maintenance and repair. The Pallion Yard is ideally placed to take advantage of this opportunity. Thousands of jobs will be created for local people within the Pallion Yard and the local supply chain. The local economy will benefit greatly from the creation of a world-class offshore marine facility. There is huge investment in offshore marine businesses taking place right now at Blyth, the Tyne, Hartlepool and the Tees. What those places have in common is that they are all on the northeast coast. We have a proud maritime tradition, and the regeneration and investment is being supported by their local councillors and MPs. Not in Sunderland, though. Skilled, rewarding work involving dirty hands, creating jobs, and aiding the local economy is not wanted by the leadership of Sunderland City Council or its MPs. It is shameful that as leaders of what was the biggest shipbuilding town in the world, they do not support the reopening of the Pallion Yard. That is the petition as read. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Last call. Are there any more petitions? Can we agree to refer these to the appropriate officers? Thank you. We now move on to written questions by the public. And these I'll now read out, so if you bear with me, I believe there's 11 with number 4, 5 and 5G being banded together. Sorry, there's 12. There's one on the back page as well. First question. When will the roadway at the top of Chip Chase be resurfaced? And Chip Chase received treatment in 2018, which I understand was expected to enhance the road surface for up to 10 years. By 2020, deep ruts had started to appear from Berwick to Ayton Road. It seems to me that the contractors who undertook this work did a very shoddy job. Who was it, and are they intending to come back and make good the poor workmanship? And I believe Claire Rowntree, Councillor Rowntree, is responding to that question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Officers are aware of the premature failure of a short section of micro asphalt on Chip Chase. The laying of this material is seasonal, and so the earliest remedial work can be undertaken in the spring of 2022. However, officers will continue to press the contractor for the specific date for these repairs, and they'll advise residents accordingly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Question 2 is emergency accommodation for the homeless, from Dawn Gibson. The question is, what resources have the council in place for homeless people requiring emergency accommodation? And I believe Councillor Johnson, Kevin Johnson, will respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Council has in place a range of resources available to respond to homelessness within the city. The Council operates a housing options team that is designated to manage and support those homeless or at threat of homelessness and ensure appropriate accommodation is available and accessed. The Homeless Service operates a 24/7 access with free phone numbers in place. Arrangements are in place either directly by the Council or with other public and private sector partners to provide a range of emergency, temporary and move-on accommodation. In addition to the accommodation available, a number of partners also provide additional support to meet specific client needs. The Council also works closely with local government departments to maximise the funding provision to the Council to support wider accommodation and support solutions for homelessness. Preventing homelessness is something we can also play a part in through positive engagement, and this is something that's been achieved through the Eviction Prevention Support Service that is also delivering a range of advice and guidance to residents to prevent evictions and ultimately homelessness. This service has already supported more than 130 residents from the private sector by acting as a mediator between landlords and tenants. And as we move into the winter months, Mr Mayor, I would like to encourage all members in this room and the wider public to use the designated channels available so we can reach homelessness, whether it's prevention or as it's occurring, and we can get the correct officers in place to deal with that. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. The next one is City Hall Green Agenda. It's from Donna Johnson. And the question is, given the Green Agenda and current concerns regarding energy supply, can the Council advise why the City Hall has almost all of the lights on during the evening without visible activity? Notwithstanding the financial implications, this does not appear to commit to the Green Agenda. And I believe Councillor Paul Stewart will respond to this one.
Firstly, can I thank Donna for the question, and it's an appropriate question to ask. At present time, City Hall is a live construction site managed by our construction contractor, Boomer and Kirkland. As we lead up to the handover to the building on the 15th of November, and the contractors are in the final commissioning stage, the passive infrared light centres are required to be on 100%. Over the next few days, this will gradually be reduced. However, some lights will remain until the 15th of November as a security deterrent. Once the City Hall is handed over, so it's in the past, once it's handed over, the council and the building will be covered through the passive infrared light sensors that have been installed, and no internal lighting should be visible out of hours unless some of this space is actually occupied by members of staff. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. The next one is 4, 5 and 5G. Apologies if I've got the name wrong. I believe it's Sarah Hudspeth and Michael Anderson. The question is, can the Leader of the Council explain what the health risks of 5G are, and what he tell us, and will he tell us if Councillor Ty's concerns about the proposed Tunstall 5G mast have led him to revise his announcement that he is rolling 5G out across the city? And can the Leader tell me if the Council's policy now is to become mired in conspiracy theories about 5G telephone mast campaigning against them so that so-called medical reasons? Would you agree with me and in any scientists that there is no scientific basis to the claim 5G masts may cause harm? Boy, this one's catching my tongue. Apologies for my sore throat. I've had a bit of cold. Certainly not COVID, I assure you. Or will he support his irrational colleague over some so-called fear which stems from conspiracy theories and the far right? Councillor Miller will respond to this one.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. The Council takes its responsibilities to public health with the utmost seriousness and conforms fully with the guidance published by Public Health England and the Commission for Non-Ionising Radiation Protection. Public Health England takes the lead on public health matters associated with electromagnetic fields or radio waves and endorses the international guidelines for limiting exposure to radio waves published by the Commission. These guidelines were updated in March 2020 and take full account of 5G operating at higher frequencies. In relation to 5G, Public Health England have said there should be no consequence for public health. The Sunderland Our Smart City website contains a number of 5G fact sheets, including a recent publication by Her Majesty's Government and Ofcom explaining the facts about 5G and the public health position. The Council remains committed to deploying next-generation digital infrastructure across the city, leaving no one and nowhere behind. This will enable the city to benefit from the resulting substantial social and economic benefits by connecting people and organisations, attracting new businesses and private sector investment, increasing local economic output and enabling transformational change across public service delivery, Mr Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Carlton West. Crime in Washington. Crime is rife in areas of Washington. Calling 999 after a hit-and-run incident on my parked car. Police in their current state could not respond appropriately. The perpetrator then committed a domestic violence attack. As I now understand, he is dead. My neighbour lost a finger in the vicious dog attack whilst walking her own dog again, no police action. Do you think we are getting the service we pay for and deserve from the police? Can the council do more to protect us should the PCC be scrapped as soon as possible? And Councillor Miller, you respond to this one. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr Mayor. The question in relation to the police response and resourcing is one which needs to be directed to the police. You know, this is the council, and the Northumbria Police need to deal with those issues for residents if they have those concerns. However, I would advise that the police do work closely with the council and with many successes. And I just want to note that the Southwick Altogether Raising Aspirations partnership is a prime working example of how, when we do things really well together, we get great results for our local residents. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Lynn Vera, Airshow funding rollover. Will the funding allocated to the 2021 Airshow be rolled over to 2022, negating the need for a council tax increase of the maximum legal amount? And Councillor Stewart will be responding to this one.
See if we get the tense right this time, shall I? Right. Again, I'd like to thank Lynn for the question. The budget monitoring for the current financial year, as reported quarterly to Cabinet and Scrutiny Coordinate Committee, takes into account the overall delivery of events for the year. Whilst it is disappointing that the 2021 Airshow has to be cancelled, an alternative and wide-ranging events programme is being delivered, which has taken into account the need to do so in a COVID-safe way. Any underspend for the year will be treated in the same way as the Council's overall budget position, but looks at the overall corporate position for the year. Unfortunately, the scale of the financial challenge facing the Council means that council tax rises do need to be considered. To put this in context, the Cabinet meeting in October reported a funding gap for the next financial year of approximately £26 million, with a further £17 million the year after. Indeed, over the next 4 years, the Council will need to either find nearly £57 million through either additional income or cuts in services. This will require the Council to use its reserves, as the reality is that we no longer have the sufficient income to fund existing services to the residents of this city. Reports will be brought to Cabinet, Council and Scrutiny Committees over the coming months prior to the budget being set by Council on the 2nd of March. This will clearly set out the totality of the Council's budget and the proposed council tax levels, in addition to providing more detail on the funding gap the Council faces as part of its medium-term financial plan. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. The next question is from Margaret Sloan, forced adoptions. On the 8th of November, BBC News aired a moving piece about forced adoptions in the 1960s, including the experience of a Sunderland resident. The video was amongst the top of 5 watched videos on the BBC News website the following day. Can I please ask for the Council's full support for the upcoming parliamentary inquiry and for calls for a government apology to the women involved? And Councillor Louise Farthing will respond to this one.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd also like to thank Margaret Sloan for her question. I too saw the BBC report on forced adoptions and was very moved by the accounts from the women who had been forced to give up their babies. I was a very young woman in the 1960s when the culture was quite different from today. There was a great stigma surrounding unmarried mothers, as they were called. I'm sure that Council will wish me to write on their behalf in support of requesting an apology as requested by Margaret. I would also like to reassure Margaret and Council that adoption practice today is very different. Together for Children, as partner in the regional adoption agency, Adopt Coast to Coast continues to review and monitor practice through both a local and national lens. In recognising the best interest of children, Adopt Coast to Coast continues to build on the strong adoption services of its partners by ensuring children who require permanence via adoption are matched to their adoptive family in a timely manner. People from all walks of life are being encouraged to consider adoption as a way of starting or building their family. Since Adopt Coast to Coast launched on the 1st of April 2021, they have received 325 enquiries and over 70 families have started their adoption journey with them. In line with statutory guidance, all efforts are made to enable children to remain with their wider family and friends network, and only when this is not in the child's best interest are plans of adoption put before the court. The stringent requirements of the judiciary are such that all options for permanence, including adoption, are weighed against the child's best interests. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I take it that you will put that question to Council about the apology.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Peter Noble, Sunderland City Council and Gen 2. Sunderland City Council places 2 Labour councillors on the board of Gen 2 each year, attracting a salary of around £10,000. Homeowners in Ox Close, Albany and Fatfield are currently being held to ransom by Gen 2 with demands of £3,000 to replace pipework and radiators as part of the district heating system replacement. Can you explain the relationship between Sunderland City Council and Gen 2 and how this relationship is being used to influence Gen 2 to treat these house owners fairly? And Councillor Johnson will respond to that one.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 2 councillors are nominated to Gen 2 Group Limited each year. Those nominations being subject to Gen 2's appointment process. Gen 2 is a community benefit society and all directors have general duties to perform, which include following the society's constitution, acting in the society's best interests to promote its success, using independent judgment to make decisions, exercising reasonable skill, care and diligence, and avoiding conflicts of interest. The appointed councillors, in common with other directors, should exercise those above duties when carrying out their role for Gen 2. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, we're conducting the questions. You're getting the answers. The next one is from Stephen Duncan, Gen 2 Financial Conduct Authority Obligations. The Financial Conduct Authority requires a not-for-profit societies, such as Gen 2, that in serving the needs of any defined communities, the society should not inhibit the benefit to the community at large. In the matter of the replacement of the Washington District heating system, does the Council leader believe Gen 2 are being fair to the residents, and does he believe that Gen 2 is fully complying with the word and spirit of its FCA obligations? And again, Councillor Johnson, you respond to this one.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whilst not directly a council matter, as obviously the portfolio holder, which includes housing, I've therefore made enquiries of Gen 2, who have confirmed that Gen 2 Group Limited is a registered community benefit society with charitable status. Gen 2 is also not-for-profit private registered provider for social housing and is regulated by the Regulator of Social Housing. Gen 2's constitutional objects, based on the National Housing Federation's model, are as follows. The association is formed for the benefit of the community. Its charitable objects shall be to carry on for the benefit of the community. The business of providing and managing housing, including social housing, and providing assistance to help people and associated facilities, amenities and services for poor people, or for the relief of aged, disabled, whether physically or mentally, or chronically sick people. Also, any other charitable object that can be carried out from time to time by a registered provider of social housing with the regulator. The Financial Conduct Authority maintains the Mutual's public register of community benefit societies, and Gen 2 is registered as such. Gen 2 is obliged to complete an annual return to ensure that the society continues to meet the condition for registration. This return states Gen 2 delivers its business for the benefit of the community as follows. The principal activities are the provision of social and affordable homes to those on low incomes who have a housing need, and the wider regeneration of local communities, including new build housing for affordable rent. Gen 2 feels that it is benefiting the community in Washington by replacing an outdated and inefficient district heating scheme. This community includes not only Gen 2 social tenants, but also leaseholders and freeholders of properties that have been acquired over the years under the right to buy legislation. Those private owners have been supplied with a new boiler free of charge, and will also benefit from having their existing central heating pipework and radiators pressure tested at the time of the boiler installation. If pressure testing highlights issues with the pipework will be repaired. This will also be free of charge to the private owners and will carry a 6-month guarantee. Gen 2 is also intending to use the opportunity to invest in its own properties that are occupied by social tenants. This investment will consist of replacing pipework and radiators. Private owners have been offered the purely optional opportunity to have Gen 2's contractor replace their pipework and radiators at a cost at the time of the new boiler being installed. Gen 2 is simply not permitted to invest its charitable resources in upgrading the properties of private owners, in this case freeholders and leaseholders, by providing free pipework and radiators. To do so would be in a breach of Gen 2's charitable objects and the regulator's standard in terms of providing value of money to its tenants. To suggest that Gen 2 is inhibiting the benefit of the community at large by not treating private owners in the same manner as social tenants is baseless and without merit. Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. We could impose a £10 fine for the Mayor's charity for that phone going off. Please make sure you've got them switched off. Take the opportunity. Right, the last question is from Gerard Joseph. How do the Council intend to support vulnerable house owners impacted by the closure of the district heating scheme? Gen 2 intends to hand back pipework and radiators that date back to the 1970s and have not been maintained to a good standard as per the restrictive covenants, which were written by Sunderland Council legal team. And again, Councillor Johnson, you respond to this one.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Council is aware of a statement attributed to Mark Edwards, Gen 2's Associate Director of Property Investment, to the effect that as well as private homeowners being offered new gas boilers free of charge, it is now optional for homeowners of affected properties to also have pipework in their property replaced at their own cost. This therefore is essentially an issue between residents and Gen 2. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. We now move on to written questions by members of Council. The first one, March Notice of Motion Pesticides from Councillor Taylor.
Would the Leader please provide an update to members on the March Notice of Motion relating to the Action Plan on banning the use of pesticides and increasing biodiversity across Sunderland? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Rowntree, I believe you're responding.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I thank Councillor Taylor for prior notice of the question. The notice of motion was to stop the use of chemical weed killer within a 3-year period, and work has commenced to meet this requirement. An action plan has been drafted which includes the key actions to produce a biodiversity strategy and accompanying policy, identified through working with others, effective alternatives to chemical weed killer, resident consultation and a communication plan. Whilst this work is undertaken, we have progressed actions which will support the overall outcomes. We have totally ceased the use of chemicals in all of our cemeteries, and we have commenced the planting of community orchards and wildflowers in various locations across the city, with more planned for the coming year. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Question 2, elimination of pesticides. And the question is from Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Your motion on the 24th of March 2021 called on this council to eliminate the use of pesticides, support our key partners and the general public to follow suit, develop a pollination strategy, develop local community orchards and gardens, and introduce a wildflowering programme. In this first year, precisely what has been done to produce this action plan, achieve these goals, hear partner strategies, and encourage local communities to eliminate the use of glyphosate? Thank you.
Thank you. Again, Councillor Roundtree, I believe you're going to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I thank Councillor Mann for prior notice of the question, and I would refer to some of the response I've given in the previous question. With the key areas, the aim is to stop within 3 years as agreed by members of this council. There is a drafted action plan with actions for a biodiversity strategy and policy, and we are sourcing alternatives. We are also consulting with residents and working with partner agencies. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Mann, supplementary.
Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Roundtree. If the motion then was to produce an action plan within 3 years of the adoption of the motion, why did one of your election leaflets state that the glyphosate ban was delivered? And can you guarantee categorically that Gen 2 and other partners are no longer using this chemical that was stated in the motion had carcinogenic properties? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Respond to that, Councillor.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. The motion was to end the use of glyphosate within 3 years, and we have taken them out of the use in cemetery so far. I can't kind of comment on partner agencies. The motion was for the council's policy on glyphosate, so I can only comment on the council's plan for that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The next one is discharge of sewerage from Councillor Morrissey.
Shameful amounts of sewage and wastewater are still being released into the sea across our city at beaches like Hendon and Seaburn. When will this council do everything in its power to stop the discharge and to take Northumbrian Water to task? Thank you.
And I believe Councillor Roundtree is answering this one as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I thank Councillor Morrissey for prior notice of the question. Whilst the Council regularly engages with Northumbrian Water Limited through a number of statutory processes, it is not within the jurisdiction of the Council to take Northumbria Water to task, as that is the responsibility of the regulator, who in this case is not the Council, but rather the Environment Agency or the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Supplementary, yes.
Can we have a full breakdown of all correspondence between the council and the regulator if the council says that's not their responsibility? What work has been done to negotiate with them? What work's already been going ahead?
Do you wish to respond to that, Councillor?
Mr. Mayor, I'll happily respond to Councillor Morrissey with via an officer, if that's okay.
Fine.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor. Next one is Dredging the River. Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Why does the authority no longer dredge the river?
Councillor Miller will respond to this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Jenkins, you'd think you'd know your city. But Sunderland City Council currently does dredge the river. It undertakes maintenance dredging operations in the port's lower and outer harbour areas. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Supplementary, yeah.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Does the Council agree that there is a financial and social gain to be had from spending £7 million to dredge the river up to Pallion when compared to spending £31 million on a smart bridge? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jenkins. Spending £7 million to dredge a river with no purpose to it is a complete waste of the residents' council tax. There is currently no interest to the owners of the shipyard or to the council from any business to merit considering spending any money dredging the river past the areas that are already dredged. This council would be delighted to look at a business plan that looked at bringing jobs and inward investment into the city. This Labour group, this council, has shown over the last few years just how much investment we've brought into this city. The 7,000 jobs we've brought in the last 3 years. Look at what's going on in Vaux. Look at what we've just done with opening up of the strategic transport corridor to link the A19 to the city centre so people can get in and out very quickly. Look at the thousands of jobs that are at Nissan. Look at the microgrid that's giving us the gigafactory with Envision AESC next to Nissan. This council is held in extremely high regard by everybody except certain members of the opposition sitting in front of me. Sorry, what was that? Councillor O'Brien, I wish I had your crystal ball because you seem to know things that, as far as I'm concerned, are 6 months away, and the people of the city will vote the way they vote, and I will deal with that if and when that happens. But what have you done for the city apart from complain? Nothing. Right? No, your job, Councillor O'Brien, is to represent some cities, represent the residents of the city.
Councillor Miller is answering a question. Allow him to answer the question. We're not having a debate on the questions. Carry on, Councillor Miller.
Thank you. I'm not getting red-faced, Councillor O'Brien. I'm slightly embarrassed for you showing that your mental age is about 6. Right? And I genuinely think you need to consider... Councillor
Miller, carry on.
No, you should apologise.
Councillors.
Mr Mayor, point of order. Meeting upon meeting, we have to sit here with these children. They're out of order, the way they're going, and Mr Mayor, if they do it anymore, get them out.
Well said.
Councillor, point of order, yeah.
Yes, under the Rules of Procedure, Section 4, it requires that if you're making a point of order, you cite the rule. As you know, this isn't happening. We have met with yourself and the option staff, so this can be done a bit more regularly. If councillors do wish to raise points of order against my group, I'd like to identify the rule that has been broken.
And equal Councillor Hodgson, I didn't respond to that. Councillor Miller.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Will you continue?
So in response, this council would happily look at any business opportunity that brought high-quality jobs into this city, and that includes the river, Councillor Jenkins. Currently, and we've asked for it repeatedly, there is no sign of any plan from any business that is interested in any investment in this city, so it would be foolish for this council to spend money that is needed to protect adult social care, to look after safeguarding issues, to ensure that our children's services and our schools and everything else that we do involving parks, litter, keeping people green, clean and safe. And until that comes along, we'll continue to focus the financial resources of the city in the areas that the residents wish us to spend them. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Next question. Appointments within public health. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Would the leader update members on recent appointments within public health who are working to reduce food poverty as well as promote healthy eating within Sunderland? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Farthing will respond to that.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher, for advance notice of the question. The Public Health team produced a food poverty scoping report in May 2021, which gave consideration on how to mitigate the impact of food poverty as a result of COVID, along with a longer-term ambition of working towards tackling food security for the residents of Sunderland post-COVID-19 pandemic and improve access to healthy, nutritious food. The scoping produced some key recommendations to support the long-term ambition of tackling food insecurity. One recommendation was the establishment of a fixed-term post for 2 years to take forward some other recommendations, including ensuring food poverty is a key priority within the Healthy Weight Alliance, conduct a mapping exercise and seek input from partners and residents to ensure there is a platform and action for participation and engagement with communities. Review and consider any ongoing impact of the economic recovery on food poverty. Consider access to training on a range of associated subjects that would support the aim of food security in the city. The food coordinator role has now been established and will be put out to advert by the beginning of December. There has not been a recent appointment for healthy eating, although there is a public health practitioner post for healthy weight, which was established in 2019 and will oversee the food coordinator role within the public health team. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Next question is dropped curbs and electric vehicles from Councillor Bernicle.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
Residents without a drop curb leading to their driveway will struggle to access a charging point for an electric vehicle. Will the portfolio holder look into establishing a repayment plan scheme for residents to get their curbs dropped to reduce on-road parking and to assist EV drivers? Thank you.
Councillor Stewart, you respond to that question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'd like to thank Councillor Bernicle for the question. Several years ago, the Council considered offering flexible repayment plans for work such as this, which was not taken forward as an option at that time. However, I would agree that in light of the current focus by the Council on the low-carbon agenda, that it would indeed be a worthwhile exercise revisiting this proposal. Any change would need to consider a range of factors, including whether this would be offered more widely or just for residents wanting to charge an electric vehicle. It is also important to note that a dropped curb solution would only be feasible where residents had off-street parking, i.e. a drive, as it would not be safe for cables to cross over pavements. It is, though, a good suggestion and one that we will actively look at and encourage with a view to encouraging more car users to make the switch to electric vehicles. And I would like to just make the comment it's actually good to have a proper, decent question, and I hope you appreciate the reply. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is the devolution deal from Councillor Edgeworth.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Does the Leader agree that Macklem should be asked whether we want to be ruled by and pay for another politician before any Metro Mayor and devolution deal is imposed upon our city?
Councillor Miller will respond to that.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Whilst the government has made clear that its preferred option would be to have a combined authority with an elected mayor covering our region, currently, no formal proposals have been made. If and when, and I do stress that if, any proposals are brought forward, our residents will be able to participate in a consultation exercise, Councillor Edgeworth, because it's required as part of the current statutory regulations. So not only Mackems, but people from the coalfield and people from Washington will all get involved in that, as I said, if and when any proposals finally arrive. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Supplementary, yeah.
I think it's disappointing that the Leader hasn't committed to, a proper vote for residents of this city who I suspect will not look kindly upon being governed by a Tyneside-based Metro Mayor. And I noticed in recent months the Leader's been taking on more responsibilities and chairing regional forums. Is that because he's eyeing up a Metro Mayor bid when he loses his seat next year?
Councillor Miller.
Thanks very much, Councillor Edgeworth, for the hinted promotion. That would be lovely, but unfortunately, there's genuinely no substance to what you've just said. There is currently no deal. There is no structure of any deal. So I have to say, as and when it comes, the statutory regulations stipulate that we at that point must consult with the residents of the city to see if they want to be part of that Metro Mayor system. So let's wait and see if it ever happens. But thanks very much for the promotion. I'll hold it in mind.
Thank you.
Next question, Polly Shipyard. Councillor Buick.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Why does the authority, Sunderland Council, need to see a business plan when it states it has no stake in the Pallion Yard?
Councillor Stewart will respond to that.
Can I thank Councillor Buick for the question? Any request by Sunderland City Council for sight of a full and comprehensive business plan has been made to third-party interests who themselves have requested an indication of support or otherwise from the Council in terms of their aspirations for the restitution of marine engineering activities at the Pallion Yard. This plan would confirm whether there was a potential support from the site owner for their proposals and therefore allow the Council to consider what appropriate support could then be provided to them. Thank you.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Despite the Council's statement to the contrary, how does the Council answer the shipyard owner's assertion that the Council is indeed a major stakeholder in the proposed development plans which they outlined to the campaign group for Pallion Shipyard? And if the shipyard owners put in a plan application that requires the demolition of the yard, will the Council reject it to bring further jobs into the city? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stewart, can you respond to that? Do you wish it to be repeated? Can you repeat that, please?
Despite the Council's statement to the contrary, how does the Council answer the shipyard owner's assertion that the Council is indeed a major stakeholder in the proposed development plans which are outlined to the campaign group? And if the shipyard owners put in a planning application that requires demolition of the shipyard, will the Council reject it to bring in further jobs into the city? Thank you.
Just to confirm that, and the leader's just confirmed as well, is we're not aware of any such plans that you made reference to. I think you need to go back to whoever's mentioned them to you and get corroboration of that, but certainly we are not aware of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next one, antisocial behaviour from Councillor Samuels.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Would the leader please update members on discussions the Council have had with Northumbria Police on tackling antisocial behaviour in wards like Southwick, where I represent, and in this city, such as the illegal use of motorbikes and quads on our streets, through to drivers ignoring the 20-mile-an-hour road safety zones that we implemented? Thank you.
Councillor Rowntree, respond.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Samuels, for prior notice of the question. The issue of ASB linked to motorbikes and quad bikes is a recognised concern, and I would advise that there is a subgroup of the Safer Sunderland Partnership set up specifically to look at this issue. As part of this work, we are working in partnership with South Tyneside Council, Gateshead Council, Gen 2 and Northumbria Police to secure a designated site for users, and an engagement event has been held with the community riders across the local authority areas who are supportive of having a designated area. On the 23rd of November, Police Scotland will facilitate a presentation to partners showcasing the work implemented in Fife, which includes sharing the success of having a designated site. We also recognise, however, that there will be those who continue to behave in an antisocial way, so we will continue as a partnership to take action in this regard. In the last 12 months, the Council has issued 59 community protection warnings in relation to this matter, and a number of police teams have purchased long lens cameras to try to help with the identification of those responsible. Where possible, the Council does attempt to install prevention measures at identified hotspot sites, and social media messages continue around this issue and the promotion of positive outcomes. Officers have recently had preliminary discussions with the Chief Inspector, Tactical Operations, Northumbria Police, regarding a number of speeding issues raised by the members and communities they represent. In particular, fixed speed camera deployment, mobile speed camera deployment, and general speeding enforcement in the city. Further discussions are required, and officers are currently arranging to meet with more senior police representatives, senior politicians, and police officers officers of the council, where these issues can be considered in more detail and a potential operational changes considered. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The next question, Festival of Light ticket sales, from Councillor McKeith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the portfolio holder please outline both how many tickets were sold for this year's Festival of Light and how much profit was made, given that many weeks were sold out? Thank you.
And I believe Councillor Williams will respond to that.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor McKeith, for prior notice of your question. As you're aware, the Festival of Light was open for 22 evenings in October and November. 21 evenings sold out, with the overall ticket sales of 80,169. That number does include tickets for under twos, which were free. The event just concluded on Saturday gone, so the final financial accounts are yet to be concluded, as the detail of the overall expenditure is still to be confirmed. And as you know, we met prior to the festival opening with residents, and we will be coming back out to meet with you as officers and members in early December. So part of that discussion would be around this, and to look at how well or otherwise the festival has gone. Thank you.
Supplementary? Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the portfolio holder outline if any preparations are being made for any events next year for possible sponsorship to subsidise any loss, if any was made, and then therefore any profit that was made could be reinvested into the communities affected? Thank you.
Okay, at the moment we don't have, as I said, the overall financial return from that. We haven't made any plans for next year because we need to listen to feedback from residents as to how that will operate. That will begin when the financial figures come in and we look at if there is a profit. We have to bear in mind that the costs, if even the lights alone were £140,000, which is rather a lot of money, but well worth it in my view. And then we need to see where we're going with that. Feedback I've had so far from the first night was, and this was the SEN night, there was some of the lights which weren't working, which isn't good enough basically, but other feedback I've had since then was it went well. So we will have to look at it in the round. You'll be part of that, and then decisions will be made moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. The last question, replacement wheelie bins. Councillor Nicholson will ask this.
Mayor, do you mind if I read this out in Colin Nicholson's absence?
Yep, certainly.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sunderland. Following on from the latest U-turn on free pest control, will the Labour leader now adopt another Liberal Democrat suggestion and introduce exemptions for the £25 charge for replacement wheelie bins when they've been stolen, set on fire, or where there's no bin present when a resident moves into a new property? Thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
Right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Council currently has a policy that all new bin requests are subject to a charge of £25. We appreciate there needs to be due consideration to respond to local needs, as well as managing the financial expenditure and service demands likely to be incurred by the Council of having a no-charge policy. However, all policies are subject to review, and this one is no different, and perhaps a review by scrutiny would be a suggestion for you. And indeed, I would suggest, considering the motions that are due to be discussed tonight, certainly if motion 1 is passed, that could be something that could be raised as part of that review by scrutiny, as a suggestion. In relation to your reference to pest control, it might be helpful to remind members that back in March, when we set our budget, the Labour Group put forward a proposal to set aside £1 million to support struggling families, a proposal that your party voted against. And while we remember, your party also voted against a £1 million climate change fund to help reduce carbon emissions in this city, but we can leave that story and the alleged climate change deniers in your group for a different day. The ending of pest controls mid-year would not have been able to take place without access to such funding that your party opposed. Yes, your party opposed. And again, it might be helpful to remind you of the support provided to struggling families, ranging from support for free school meals during school closure periods, through the decision of the Council to reduce bulky waste removal charges to just £10, again a budget proposal that your party voted against. The decisions on removing charges for pest control, tackling food poverty in this city, reducing bulky waste charges to just £10 should never be seen in isolation. They're all part of a sustained effort by this Council to support struggling families and those in need suffering the effects of an uncaring government. Much of this work has been built into our community wealth building strategy, and I think there's the clues there is in the title, to enhance economic and social wealth for the residents so that they can have the means to play an active part in their communities. So I'm proud of our decision to reduce the charge for bulky waste removal to just £10. I'm proud of our decision to become an accredited real living wage employer and working to become a real living wage city and trying to end working poverty in this city. And I'm proud to support and provide support to up to 10,000 residents a year for welfare rights needed to help support them after they've suffered, for example, benefit sanctions. And yes, I am proud of our decision to end pest control charges. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Very comprehensive answer there, wasn't it?
I actually don't understand it. I think it's maybe.
If you don't want the answer, don't ask the questions. Moving on. Report of the Cabinet. Can I call upon the Leader to move the approval and adoption of the report of Cabinet and the supplementary report? Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I so move the report of Cabinet and the supplementary report.
Deputy Leader, do you second the report? Thank you. Leader, would you like to speak to the Cabinet report?
I so move the report, Mr. Mayor. It's fully laid out for everyone to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Move on. If any member wishes to speak, can you please raise your hand, identify the number of the Cabinet report and state whether you have an amendment, comment or question.
Mr Mayor, through you, could I just advise that we've had prior notification that Councillor Hodson wishes to speak on item 1 of the Cabinet report, Councillor Julia Potts on item 2, the Annual Health and Safety report, and Councillor Hodson on item 3, the update to the Constitution.
So, Councillor Hodson first. Sorry. Councillor, do you wish to raise a point?
I do, yes, a question on item 1 and comments on item 2.
We'll just get these in order. Give us a moment. You want any more?
And Councillor Dixon?
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Mayor, sorry. I'd like to speak on the Council's procedural rules, Rule 11, Section 1, please. Thank you.
Anyone else? So that's what you want to speak on. Well, it's gone now.
You could ask Councillor Doyle to speak while we're waiting for Councillor Hudson to come in, do you like?
Councillor Doyle, do you wish to speak while we're waiting for our absent friends?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for that contribution as well, Councillor Gibson. So first, the question on item 1, the Council's capital strategy. The Treasury has announced that Sunderland has received the round 1 levelling up funding from government. So I'd just like some more details on what that funding will be used for, please. On item 2, the comment on the annual health and safety report. Council will recognise that sections 6.3 and 6.4 of the report refer to a matter about which the Conservative group questioned the then Deputy Leader, Councillor Stewart, at a meeting of Council earlier this year. In response to that line of questioning, as we all know, the Council's leadership seemed unaware of the problem entirely. But putting aside the commentary about there not being a rat problem in the city, it's alarming to read that concerns were raised about members of staff catching Viles disease from rats in the depot. However, this report doesn't concern itself to mention in any detail the extent of the situation and how bad it really was. So can we therefore have more information on the nature of the concerns raised and on the outcome of the detailed investigation that we're told took place? More generally, when are we going to get some transparency around what's been going on in the Council's refuse services, please? We're aware, for example, that refuse workers had issues getting the right PPE at the beginning of the pandemic, but that isn't reflected here despite complaints being raised. And then the comment on item 3, the update to the Constitution. First point I'm going to raise is something that Councillor Dixon, I think, is going to talk about in greater detail. But whilst the Conservative group has reluctantly accepted the 3-question limit, this was preferable only to being able to ask no questions at all. We still prefer the arrangement whereby all councillors could submit questions that mattered to them and the people of their wards. This is a sentiment we know is shared by members of all political parties, including the one that voted these changes through, and we must note that it was just the one party that wanted to change our constitution in the first place. The second point, Labour, and more specifically one wing of the Labour group, has found different ways of limiting scrutiny and participation in meetings recently, including at the expense of its own backbench councillors, just because the size of the opposition on the council has increased, and it's done so on the basis that meetings were going on for too long. But we want the public to know, at least, we were more than happy to give up our time to raise their concerns and issues. Labour's methods have included changing meeting times just to inconvenience Conservative councillors, we're told, and now limiting the number of questions that can be asked. Next point, the previous reason given that asking more questions puts a greater burden on officers is, I think, a poor one. These aren't questions to officers, they're questions to members of the Cabinet, and portfolio holders are paid enough that we should expect them to be sufficiently across their brief and capable, therefore, of producing their own answers. Yet Labour has done nothing to stick to the rules they've introduced, happily accepting an extension to the last meeting because it suited them, whilst cutting short a debate on speeding and road safety. Opposition parties were happy to extend time for both, but Labour only extended time for itself. This, in our view, is frankly an authoritarian response by a Labour group that doesn't quite know how to handle scrutiny or indeed how to win elections. But the public is losing faith with Labour for this exact reason. As a matter of principle, people don't want to see democratically elected councillors told that their ability to operate in public meetings is increasingly limited, and so I want to reassure members of the public that any future Conservative administration would begin to undo Labour's vandalism of our constitution on day one. To sum up, the Conservative group agreed to these changes as the lesser of two evils in the short term, but we don't expect they'll last beyond May, nor will the leader who pushed them through, because if the public doesn't want him out, I gather what's left of the Labour group will. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
I'm not going to let him speak. Move on then. Right, we're going to move on to item 2. Councillor Potts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a question about the health and safety report, but I just want to acknowledge that health and safety is challenging, as is everything, during COVID times, and thank everybody involved in health and safety for the work during this time. The question's not particularly COVID related, it's referring to the alcohol and substance misuse testing, page 44, item 4.8. 109 cases were identified as reasonable cause, but only 3 findings detected. That seems like a very low number for reasonable cause, and in my experience would be more likely for random testing. Are there any further details of the circumstances, for example, were the cases as a result of an accident or an incident, or were people reported as a suspected case but then were negative? And I'm asking out of concern, the question out of concern for the council employees. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dixon.
Mr. Mayor, before I start, could I just take this opportunity of paying tribute to the council officers for their excellent work at Remembrance Sunday. We were there together with other councillors. Our colleagues did a magnificent job at what was obviously a very moving experience for us all. So thank you, and please pass it on. I'm just going to refer here to members' questions, quite honestly. We have a part of the Cabinet report which describes us as being advocates of and for our communities, which we all try our best to do. And then we move on to another part of the report which restricts us to asking 3 questions per political party. So we changed from being advocates of and for our communities to being restricted to put that into practice. Now, as you may recall, this procedure was going to start with the Chief Executive really seeing which questions were allowed for a full council meeting. That didn't work. There was one meeting where we didn't have any questions, and now we're down to 3 per group. Now, the bizarre way this is working is, I presume, Councillor Buick, you're allowed 3 questions, yeah. So there's two UKIP councillors who can ask 3. Sorry, you're right. Sorry. 3 independent councillors, two independent councillors. Well, if you hadn't interrupted, I wouldn't have got my numbers wrong. There are 2 independent former UKIP councillors who can ask 3 questions. There are 19 Conservatives, there are 12 Liberal Democrats, and reducing the executive for the Labour Party, I would imagine 30-something. So we'll say 34, whatever it is. So there's 9 questions that can be asked to 73 councillors, and that is the situation that we're in at the moment. It's absolutely ridiculous. How did we come to this situation? My own view is that leader, deputy leader, portfolio holders took far too much time with their answers. Far too many people got fond of the sound of their own voices. The answers were clearly designed to take up as much time as possible and ought to allow the individuals to grandstand in front of full council. So with this form of filibustering, and not all the questions were heard openly, because when it suited them, the majority party, no doubt under instructions from the leadership, would vote down any extension proposed by the opposition councillors, even if it meant some of their own questions remained unanswered, openly and not behind closed doors. That was the price the majority party were prepared to pay to ensure that questions from opposition parties were not heard. So as we come to this report, this is not a long-term fix. This needs to be reviewed yet again. The majority party argue that it's a greater disadvantage to them because they've got more councillors. But this is a weak argument because the vast majority of the full council meetings are taken up by the same people who dominate proceedings meeting after meeting, namely the executive of this council. This was the case in the past when there was unlimited questions, and now it's even more evident where we have literally a closed shop. And it's never ceased to amaze me how little opportunity was and is given to those Labour councillors with something noteworthy to say who are not portfolio holders to ask meaningful questions. Little wonder that some of them have just packed in and resigned. So that was a Labour issue. But what is happening now, of course, is that it is an attempt to nullify the contribution of opposition councillors when, of course, there are a great many more than there were in the past. We are more likely to challenge the ruling party with searching questions.
Councillor Dixon, the 5 minutes is up.
Right. May I just conclude? Could I just finish?
Finish up.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So I'll just conclude by saying that if we do get a future opportunity from the people of the city to be a greater voice on Sunderland Council, it goes without saying we will be revisiting this assault on free and open speech as a top priority. Thank you.
Councillor Hodgson still hasn't returned, so sadly he's missed his opportunity.
Mr Mayor, just to clarify, Niall Hodgson wasn't looking to speak, he was making a declaration on item 4, so he's stepping out rather than looking to speak. Thank you.
So we move on to page 11. Yeah. Deputy Leader, do you wish to speak? Okay. Leader, do you wish to reply?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I just took a few notes so I would remember what was asked by whom, hence the Orange Book. Councillor Doyle, the £20 million, which was warmly received, will be going into our Housing Innovation Construction Skills Academy on the Vaux site. It will be going into housing on Sunnyside, and it will be going into housing on the Vaux site. So that's where that money is going. Regarding health and safety issues regarding that site, and I thought we dealt with this, I cannot give you a response on that. That is a health and safety matter. I will ask a senior officer, the chief executive, to ensure that if there's anything that can be shared, because this is a staff matter, that councillors will be made aware of it. So hopefully that covers that matter for you, Councillor Doyle. And then we get on to Councillor Potts and her health and safety question as well. Councillor Potts, once again, I cannot answer you because I do not have that information, but I will ensure probably that our Director of Public Health or Executive Director Fiona Brown gets a response to you, okay? Thank you. Going back to the Conservative Party trying to rewrite history, I mean, Councillor Dixon's issues regarding scrutiny. Am I living in an alternative reality where the fact that I had conversations with the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives about how we were having full council meetings that were lasting more than 8 hours, and we had to do something to bring those meetings down to a sensible time because it was unsustainable to the extent that we were having to then call emergency meetings the following day to carry on business, which meant that councillors could not get to those meetings because they had work, family or caring commitments. And the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrats agreed to that, as did, at that time, the 3 UKIP councillors that we had. It was agreed that this was a sensible way forward to try and ensure that full council lasted a sensible time. Is it only in my head that we agreed that we'd have a 3-hour limit to full council? No, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats, and at that stage, UKIP councillors agreed that we would change the time as well. So now that I don't know why you're trying to basically rewrite history. You agreed to all of this. We all agreed to all of this. And the party that's impacted on the worst by the limit on questions is the Labour Party. Because we've got the most councillors and we proportionately could ask the most questions. So I just think that's just nonsense for you to forget what's gone on over the last 8 months when we agreed this as a collective council, voted it through collectively, and you're now saying, oh, we don't like it. Well, as Councillor Dixon pointed out, at the end of the day, you might be able to change that next year. We might all look at it next year. But this is the situation we have at the moment, which you all agreed to. Scrutiny. I don't sit on scrutiny. So at the end of the day, councillors who do not sit on cabinet have the ability to bring forward proposals to do whatever you want with scrutiny. I'll support them all. I was a scrutiny chair before I became a cabinet member. Right? I'm a strong advocate of strong scrutiny, but all I hear is complaints and whinging about this, and then nothing comes forward from you, ladies and gentlemen. So I am challenging you. If you want to change scrutiny, bring it through the scrutiny process and let's see what you come up with, rather than coming here and trying to get a nice little soundbite for the Echo tomorrow morning. Because you're in charge of that. I've got nothing to do with it. You know, and that's how it must remain. So that's my comments, Mr. Mayor, so I'll just leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do you accept the report of Cabinet? Thank you very much. I now call upon the Cabinet Secretary to move the Audit and Governance Committee Annual Report. Councillor Stewart. Thank you. Councillor Neil McKnight, do you second the report? Thank you. Cabinet Secretary, would you like to speak to the report? No. Councillor McKnight, you didn't reserve the right to speak. Do you wish to speak? Okay. Did you say you wish to speak? Right. Any members wish to speak? Cabinet Secretary, do you wish to exercise your right to reply? No, that's fine. Can we receive and note the Audit and Governance Committee Annual Report? Yeah, well, that was easy, wasn't it? Next is the report on the action on petitions. I understand Councillor Edgeworth wishes to speak on the report. Do any other members wish to comment on the report? No. Councillor Edgeworth.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a few brief comments, and if I may, obviously, residents in Grindon and Hastings Hill will be disappointed that there isn't a firm commitment in this petition response to replacing this notorious subway, and I hope the upcoming review will look favourably on that request. But just a few things in the petition that I want to take issue with and get on the record. Anyone who uses the stretch of Chester Road at Hastings Hill will know that the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit which is mentioned in the report isn't observed, and people are taking their life in their hands to cross the 4 lanes of really high speed and traffic to get to Aldi or to get to the bus stop to go into town because they don't want to use this subway. I don't think that's acknowledged in the report response to the petition, and I think the claim that an additional pedestrian crossing at the new Chester Gate development provides an additional crossing location in this place is also ludicrous, because that's about 1/3 of the mile down the road and there's not even a pavement on the other side, so you cannot use it as a replacement for the subway. So I think that's isn't really accurate in this report. So the people I've shared it with before this meeting who signed the petition, unfortunately don't have much faith in it. So I wonder if the Deputy Leader could agree to come and meet with some of the petitioners and with me and see the unsafe situation and the horrible stench in this subway for ourselves, and then commit to residents getting some action on this. Thank you.
Can I just remind councillors that this report is not for debate, but I have allowed you to make those comments. Can we accept the report? Thank you. The next item is the reports, which includes a report of the Leader on special urgency decisions and a report on appointments to committees of outside bodies. We'll take these in turn, starting with the Leader's report on special urgency decisions. Leader, would you please move the report?
I move the report, Mr Mayor, and there have been none.
Deputy Leader, do you second the report? Does Council agree the report? Next, we deal with the report on appointments to committees and outside bodies. Leader, would you please move the report?
I so move the report.
Deputy Leader, do you second the report? Leader, do you wish to speak to the report?
No, the report is fully laid out, Mr Mayor.
Deputy Leader, do you wish to speak? Thank you. Councillor Dixon and Councillor Hodgson have indicated. Councillor Hodgson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sunderland. Just to advise that we'd like to put forward Colin Nicholson to take the vacant seat on Planning and Highways East. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dixon. Okay. With that nomination, is the report agreed? Thank you very much. Members are reminded that arrangements were made for notice of motion to be given electronically, rather than signed and delivered in person. Leader, would you move the suspension of the relevant standing orders with regard to this?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I would like to move suspension of Standing Order 12 so far as it requires the signing and delivering of a notice of motion to be carried out in person.
Deputy Leader, do you second the motion?
I second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Does the Council agree to the suspension of the relevant standing orders? Thank you. We'll start with the notice of motion, addressing government failure to reduce inequality. I invite the Leader to read and move the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. This Council notes that since 2010, successive Conservative-led governments have failed to address inequalities in society, noting that levels of deprivation and poverty have significantly increased since the introduction of the 2010 Equality Act, continually refused to enact Section 1 of the Equality Act that would place a legal duty on governments to address these inequalities and reverse this rise in poverty and deprivation. This Council now requires to further provide leadership in supporting struggling families in this city, and therefore resolves with immediate effect to voluntarily adopt the socio-economic duty that Conservative-led governments refuse to enact, ensuring that when making decisions of a strategic nature, it will act in a way that is designed to reduce the inequalities of outcome which result from disadvantage. That in adopting this duty, the Council will incorporate poverty and socio-economic disadvantages into equality impact assessments, equality plans and the wider decision-making process and all strategic planning. Use a range of quantitative and qualitative data to inform the implementation of this duty and develop clear success criteria to measure the impact in reducing levels of inequality, recognise the value of engaging with struggling families directly impacted by these inequalities, working together to find new and sustainable ways to support them and reduce poverty. In addition, work with stakeholders and voluntary community sector organisations to build awareness and understanding of this new duty adopted by the Council and receive reports on progress on a 6-monthly basis. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Deputy Leader, do you second the notice of motion?
I second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Leader, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. At the 2005 general election, New Labour promised to introduce a new Equality Act to simplify the existing body of legislation governing equality in the workplace and promote equality at work. The Act was enacted in 2010 and replaced a variety of previous acts where many of the sections within the previous pieces of legislation dealing with discrimination had overlapped, and the Act simplified the law and made it easier for all to understand and apply. Part 1 of the Act covers socio-economic inequalities and asks public authorities, the government, to actively consider the way in which their policies and their most strategic decisions can increase or decrease inequalities, our social economic duty to looking after our people. Successive Tory-led governments since 2010 have failed to enable this, in effect to bring it to life in technical terms. A recent report by Just Fair shows that tax and social security cuts since 2010 have violated the rights to social security and to an adequate standard of living in breach of international human rights law. The evidence has made abundantly clear that benefit changes, including the benefit freeze and cap and benefit sanctions, have disproportionately affected people at risk of harm, discrimination and disadvantage. Had this socio-economic duty been enforced, the government would have been unable to demonstrate how austerity policies were compatible with its international human rights obligations. Another consequence of Osbornenomics and Tory planned austerity politics that has blighted millions of people's lives over the last 11 years, including our Sunderland residents. Successive Conservative-led governments have failed to address inequalities in society, noting that levels of deprivation and poverty have significantly increased under their watch. They have continually refused to enact Section 1 of the Equality Act that would place a legal duty to address these inequalities and reverse this rise in poverty and deprivation. This government is showing its true colours. One rule for us and one rule for them. The same old Tory party, the same old nasty party. This Labour Council will not stand by while our residents are driven to the brink financially, socially or on health grounds. We are working to bring everyone with us. We stand with hard-pressed, hard-working families and individuals, and we will work to leave no one behind whilst the Tory government continues to give billion-pound tax cuts to their banker mates and looks to change the rules to protect their corrupt MP chums. As observed by the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Philip Alston, last November, the experience of the United Kingdom, especially since 2010, underscores the conclusion that poverty is a political choice. A political choice indeed, where the Tories have decided that the working poor will pay whilst the top 5% get the benefit of tax breaks, bonuses for bankers, penury for the poor. Equality defines a fair society. It should not be a postcode lottery, which is what we have under the Tory government. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation tells us that currently 14.2 million people are in poverty in the United Kingdom. 4.5 million of them children, 8.4 million of them working-aged adults, 1.4 million pensioners. 6.9 million are disabled or live with a disabled individual. 8.2 million live more than 25% below the poverty line. 2.5 million live a mere 10% above the poverty line and could drop into that figure very soon. This is the reality in the United Kingdom in the 21st century after 11 years of Tory rule. Let me show you, though, the track record of a different government, a Labour government under Blair and Brown, embracing the principles of the Equality Act, including the social inclusion elements at Section 1. We introduced the national minimum wage. We employed over 14,000 more police in England and Wales. We cut our overall crime by 32%, record levels of literacy and numeracy in schools, 85,000 more nurses, 32,000 more doctors. We devolved power to the Scottish Parliament. We devolved power to the Welsh Assembly. We restored devolved government to Northern Ireland. Dads got paternity leave of 2 weeks for the first time. We had record numbers of students in higher education.
Councillor, you've just gone on to the 5 minutes. That was agreed.
I'll be quick, 2 minutes.
It's important, Leader. Continue. Make it brief.
I will make it brief. However, this was only 25 of the things that New Labour did under Blair and Brown, showing proper involvement with social justice. Now, this is what working for the people actually looks like, delivered by the Labour Party in government between 1997 and 2010. And we understand the need for social inclusion and everything we did to improve Britain whilst in government. Across the coalfield, Washington and Sunderland, Labour will look to protect people and defend them from the worst of the socio-economic inequalities that this Tory government continues to impose on them. And I call on all councillors to support this motion. The residents of Sunderland deserve your support on this matter, and they may ask why you did not. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for the allowance.
Deputy Leader, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will speak briefly, but I just wanted to focus on an essential aspect of the motion, which is to consult with those who are most impacted by inequality in our city. While Section 1 of the Equality Act was formed to protect people from discrimination, it was also designed to improve the lives of working class people through tackling inequality. But that part of the Act, i.e. the socio and economic duty, was never brought into force by government. It's no surprise really that the current government continues to feel in its legal duty to consider the impact on inequalities in the decisions it makes. It much prefers to use the politics of division, the narrative that pits communities against each other and blames those most vulnerable for the ills of our society. Inequality has deepened over successive years and has become enshrined by a decade of austerity. COVID has now deepened these inequalities even further. We must, as elected representatives, actively ensure better incomes for lower income people. It's actually a lot more than recognising the value of people's input into policy. Their voices are absolutely integral if we are ever to achieve the real systemic change we need to reduce inequality in society and indeed in our city. We need a participatory and inclusive society that dismantles the structures of discrimination which drive poverty and inequality. That is why the people impacted must be driving the policies of our city if we genuinely want to drive down that inequality. We of course need more resources, but we need more political will, and we need more tools, and we need technology, and we need faster implementation of policy. But we must accept that equitable and sustainable development must be achieved with and not for people. Development is not just about changing the material conditions that prevent a person from reaching these goals. It is also about empowering people with voice and agency to be active participants in designing their own solutions and shaping policy development. Transforming policy, practice and social norms and power relations such that everyone can flourish in equal dignity and freedom. People must have a say over decisions that impact their everyday lives. They must be empowered to have a say in decisions about their neighbourhoods, towns and cities. But empowering people means moving beyond purely technocratic solutions and treating people as passive objects of aid or charity. They must be shaping the decisions and policies that affect them. The acceptance of this motion will help us to achieve that.
Thank you. I understand Councillor Hodgson wishes to move an amendment. Would you like to read that out, Councillor?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sunderland. I'd like to move an amendment to the motion. I'll read it out top to bottom. In the first bullet point, delete the word since and replace it with the word despite. Delete the third bullet point and replace it with the following two bullet points. To voluntarily adopt the socio-economic duty as stated in Section 1 of the Equality Act 2010, which Conservative-led governments have refused to enact, and to ensure strategic decisions are designed to reduce and or mitigate the inequalities of outcome which result from disadvantage. And at the end of the final bullet point, delete the words on progress on a 6-monthly basis and insert the words on a 6-monthly basis on progress in achieving clearly defined and actionable targets both for this new duty and for the 9 existing protected characteristics defined in the Equality Act of 2010. So I can read out the motion as amended. It would read, this council notes that since 2010, successive Conservative-led governments have failed to address inequalities in society, noting that levels of deprivation and poverty have significantly increased despite the introduction of the 2010 Equality Act, continually refused to enact Section 1 of the Equality Act that would place a legal duty on governments to address these inequalities and reverse this rise in poverty and deprivation. This council now now resolves to further provide leadership in supporting struggling families in the city and therefore resolves with immediate effect to voluntarily adopt the socio-economic duty as stated in Section 1 of the Equality Act of 2010, which Conservative-led governments have refused to enact, to ensure strategic decisions are designed to reduce and or mitigate the inequalities of outcome which result from disadvantage, and that in adopting this duty, the Council will incorporate poverty and socio-economic disadvantages into equality impact assessments, equality plans and the wider decision-making process in all strategic planning, use a range of quantitative and qualitative data to inform the implementation of this duty and develop clear success criteria to measure the impact in reducing levels of inequality, to recognise the value of engaging with struggling families directly impacted by these inequalities, working together to find new and sustainable ways to support them and reduce poverty, in addition to work with stakeholders and voluntary and community sector organisations to build awareness and understanding of this new duty adopted by the Council, and finally to receive reports on a 6-monthly basis on progress in achieving clearly defined and actionable targets both for this new duty and for the 9 existing protected characteristics defined in the Equality Act 2010. Thank you for your patience with that.
Thank you.
Mayor Sunderland, I move the amendment.
I understand Councillor Morrissey will second this amendment.
Yeah, I'd like to second the amendment and speak in support of it after now.
Councillor Hudson, would you wish to speak the amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sunderland. The purpose of this amendment is quite straightforward. We're broadly supportive of the motion, but concerned by the wording of it as it stands, as it seems essentially to pay lip service to reducing inequality whilst taking the opportunity to have a bash at the Tories. I don't have a problem with the Labour Party having a bash at the Tories, but we felt that the motion might be stronger if it placed some firmer commitments on the Council and us as councillors in terms of reducing inequality. So we're proposing a few small but important amendments. Firstly, to make clear in the first bullet point that inequality hasn't increased because of the Equality Act, but despite it, which is open to misinterpretation in the original wording. The Equality Act is, as Graham Miller has said, a good piece of legislation that simply needs to be applied more rigorously, and we completely support the idea that this Council can take a lead in doing that here in Sunderland. We've amended the third bullet point to more firmly hold the Council to decision-making that reduces or mitigates inequalities of outcome. The original motion merely suggested that the Council should act in a way designed to reduce inequalities. Again, it's a subtle point, but it's stronger wording that produces a stronger statement and commitment. And finally, we've expanded the final bullet point to ask not merely for a regular report from officers, but for actionable targets across this new duty of tackling socio-economic inequalities, and also acknowledging that we ought to be doing more across the board on reducing other inequalities and defending the 9 protected characteristics defined in the Equality Act. If we're going to be getting reports on this new duty, we might as well be hearing what the Council is doing about its other duties under the Equality Act. Doing this would give us more information as elected councillors. It would put us in a stronger position to challenge, scrutinise and refer back proposals and decisions which ignore these duties to tackle socio-economic inequality in the city. It would put the onus on all of us, councillors and officers, ruling group and opposition, to properly consider poverty as a key factor in decision making. And I can see actually that it may run up against some of the Cabinet's more lavish proposals for the city centre for private housing, but that's surely a good thing. I welcome the majority group's willingness to put themselves up to the challenge, and I hope they'll support this amendment and give a little more bite to the proposals. Thank you, Mayor Sunderland.
Thank you. Councillor Morrissey, do you wish to speak now?
Thank you, Mayor of Sunderland. I was completely dismayed when I originally read the motion. I'm appalled that the Council does not already incorporate poverty in its assessment and that it's taken over a decade for the Labour Party's brightest sparks to decide that perhaps this might be a good idea. This is classic Labour self-congratulation. They should be embarrassed that it's taken them 47 years in charge to realise the importance of tackling poverty, and all former Cabinet members applauding this move are in reality just highlighting and applauding their own failures in office. It's all well and good attacking the Tory-led government for not following its own rules, but Labour have run Sunderland the entire time the Equality Act has been in force and could have passed this motion at any point in the last 11 years. But look, credit where it's due. I'm fully in support of the substance of the motion, which is that poverty is important and the Council should incorporate it into its assessment of the city. This is a welcome step forward. I wonder if we'd had this policy in place earlier, would we have avoided councillors troughing it at £30,000 marquees while bins went unemptied? Would we have vanity bridges that go nowhere? Would the Council have seen it fit to waste tens of millions of Sunderland taxpayer pounds on renting swanky offices which we'll never own? But I suppose we'll never know. And this, I think, highlights the importance of the amendment. You cannot trust Labour on the substance of this motion. You can trust them to say the right things in front of the press and in the council chamber, but their behaviour in the record does not match their rhetoric. In my own ward, one of the poorest in the city, Labour were perfectly happy to charge residents £50 a pop to get the pest control wardens out. There was no acknowledgement that this was unaffordable for the majority of residents. What was the end result? A rat infestation, a flat-out denial of the issue from Labour's top brass, followed by a hasty U-turn once we'd put a petition out. Is that the behaviour of a ruling group that cares about poverty? Labour may use the language of liberation and equality in their press releases, literature and speeches, but time and time again they fail to live up to their supposed values. We need a mechanism to hold the Council's feet to the fire and keep Cabinet members accountable, because for nearly half a century, Sunderland Labour have shown us all that a party of the poor and disadvantaged has a vested interest in keeping them that way. We don't need apparatchiks to stand up and defend Comrade Graham's unblemished record in our glorious People's Republic. We need clear, easily understandable goals which focus on the poorest in our city. We needed them 10 years ago, but seeing as Labour had no interest then, we can at least introduce them now. I urge colleagues to vote for the amendment. It's high time the Council was held to account for its failures, and I look forward to reading the first report in 6 months' time at the first full Council meeting after no overall control. Thank you.
I understand Councillor Ali and O'Brien have indicated that they wanted to speak on the motion. Do you wish to speak on the amendment?
I think my colleague has said enough.
So you don't want to speak on the amendment? Fine. Councillor Ali? On the motion. Right, okay. Does anyone else wish to speak on the amendment?
Councillor Farthing. Leader has a right of reply. Councillor Fiona Miller. Councillor Stewart. Who's that at the back? Sorry, is that Councillor? Sorry, I didn't catch. Donaghy, sorry. Apologies. So, Mr Mayor, the speakers on the amendment are Councillors Farthing, Fiona Miller, Councillor Stewart, Councillor Donaghy, and the Leader has the right of reply on the amendment.
Right, Councillor Farthing.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not sure about whether the leader is going to accept the amendment, but to me, he's nodding, and I don't disagree with the sentiments expressed. The council always has looked to support the needs of the less well-off in the city, but I will agree with you that we have often in the past, due to the sort of constraints of economic stridency, done some things which perhaps have not been appropriate. And one of those things in my ward was, which is the £25 administration charge for replacement waste bins. We've already had a question on that tonight. And we've also heard about the additional amount of side waste that's accumulating in the city. Now, to my mind, that is something that seems to appear in those areas that are socially, economically disadvantaged. And in my ward, in a particular area, we've had to sort of bring in a special project to replace or provide waste bins because we didn't have sufficient, and people were using recycling bins for waste. And that project's been running for about 6 months now. The problem was that the recycling bins were not getting emptied, they were getting sealed, and it just became an ongoing problem. Any bins that were collected by the recycling wagon contaminated the whole waste, the whole recycling, so the whole lot had to be got rid of. It was damaged. So it was a policy which really has created more concerns and more expense for the council. So I'm looking forward to this being looked at scrutiny, as Councillor Stewart has suggested, because I think it's what we need to do. Now, the greatest imperative is that we must set up a form of consultation with those with lived experience so they can tell us how to create policies and systems that help rather than impede their lives. The COVID pandemic has highlighted disadvantages never before, whether this was children missing out on free school meals or being marginalised because they either did not have internet connection at home or devices or sufficient devices or a quiet space to use them. The government did eventually provide funding for free school meals, but it had to be shamed into that path by Marcus Rashford. The digital devices took too long to arrive in schools, and there were too few to meet the high needs in places like Sunderland. If the socio-economic duty had been enacted, would we really have a benefit system that is not responsive to people's needs? A system that results in indebtedness to the state, which would be there to help, not handicap? We would not have rising child poverty in Sunderland and the need for food banks. We would have not have changed the census relating to pupil premium from the two times a year, October and January, to once a year, which ultimately affects places like Sunderland. It has meant a loss of nearly £1 million to Sunderland schools. The Chancellor would not have broken the link between the uplift in pensions and the triple lock, which is a safety net for the poorest pensioners who rely on state retirement pension. If the socio-economic section had been enacted, we would have had a much fairer society. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Fiona Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I promise to be precise. Addressing the government's failure to reduce inequality. I want to make my city flourish, to have healthy, happy residents with warm, safe homes, and to be financially stable with good job prospects for all. That's social justice. To remove the divide that stops growth and to improve education for everyone. To communicate with all our residents to remove the barriers that make some people struggle with life. I'm currently reading the Trade Union Act and the representation of the chain makers of Cradley Heath, the Black Country Strike of 1910. There are similarities in the background of those who have and those who have not. And again, I ask you to refer to what this government has done for the residents of our city. To quote a line from Mr. Sitch, "They have leached the blood of our poor residents. Enough, I say. I can see through their dodge very well. This government are a deep designing, cunning and unscrupulous set of knaves. The Prime Minister, Boris, that so-called pious and enthusiastic goody-goody, is not a whit better, only he is trying to pose as a friend of the worker. Enough, I say. We need to uncover the reality of this lying, sly, twisted set of individuals to our residents who have only suffered under the Tories' continuing cuts to the hard-pressed working class. Richie Rich has fibbed yet again to his party and to the fair people of the UK. How many are really going to be better off with a social care levy, tax increases on fuel and the cost of living? From his budget of October 2021, and with the removal of the £20 uplift, the rise of 6.6% doesn't add up. I think not. Levelling up, more like levelling down. This party have yet again stolen the great work of the Labour Party. Let me think, did we not have Sure Start to help our families? Cut by the coalition of chaos, if I recall. Now to be rebadged by the Tories because they have suddenly realised how much the cost can be to sort out the mess they have caused by imposing poverty on millions of our hard-working families. Removing the financial uplift that the North East councils required to provide the services we had during the Labour years, such as Sure Start, which used to be run by local government, are a thing of the past, and the residents complain, but not to the right people. It's the national government who are responsible for the removal of cash and our ever-decreasing services. Tory cuts tax the working poor. Where do I go with this? These working families, some are now in poverty, faced with the stress and the worry of feeding the family, paying the ever-increasing bills and existing, just existing. This puts stress on the NHS and public services through the lack of realistic financial support. Yes, money really does make the world go round. We need to be inclusive and supportive for our residents, to change a divide and to make poverty a thing of the past here. From the Labour group's efforts, not on the never, possible or again not, funding from the national government. This government are so morally corrupt they cannot see the reality of what they're doing to fellow human beings. They are the party of sleaze and U-turns. No morals, I said last time, and I'll say it again, the truth hurts. Mr Mayor, I fully support the motion and the amendment.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think as the leader has nodded in the sense of the Labour group will be supporting the amendment, though I have to admit Councillor Morrissey did his best to get us to change our minds. But we've stuck to our view that the amendment is, to be fair, it strengthens what was already there, and I'll be honest in that respect. So I'll go through what I was intended to do with regards to the main motion anyway. But the first thing is to stress that Section 1 of the Equality Act, by its very nature, it was Section 1. It was one of the key aspects of that Act, and that sadly the Conservatives for 11 plus years have failed to enact something that would have made real change to society. I'm therefore pleased that this motion, or potentially amended motion, will commit the Council to enshrine this duty into its decision-making and strategic planning. I feel the voluntary adoption of this duty will have a major impact on Council services and functions as we move forward. This is not just about services that are in place to support struggling families, because we do a lot of that, and I've mentioned some of that earlier, but it's about exercising all of its functions and how these can be used to reduce inequalities of outcome. So yes, it's about education and opportunity for all, but it's all about, for example, traffic and highways and how that might impact on residents in more deprived areas of the city. Yes, it's about reducing health inequalities, but it's all about licensing, it's about planning, and the impact of future housing developments, and even how we support our local economy are all areas that this duty would impact upon. In relation to the latter point, and picking up the point that Niall mentioned with regards to having some criteria, some benchmarks, the Community Wealth Building Group that is looking at developing a community wealth building programme for the city is looking at some kind of benchmarks that we can put in place. And some of the examples that we're looking at that would have a real impact are the number of workers who are earning less than the real living wage and how we track that, the number of businesses within Sunderland who are real living wage employers, looking at funding secured through council procurement, which supports our VCS Alliance network, the number of volunteer hours secured to support the VCS and communities, and for example, the number of private and public organisations who adopt what we're looking towards, having a gold standard as a community wealth charter that we'll be introducing. All these things we can track over time. And to be fair, there's probably 101 of these in the working group that we have. But we need to look at and identify the key ones. But you're quite right in the sense of ensuring that they're tracked over time. I think, just to conclude, I think the adoption of this duty will give elected members, but also each and every resident of this city, the real power to scrutinise decisions of the council and to challenge how policies, plans and decisions taken have been designed to reduce the inequalities of outcome which results from this socio-economic disadvantage. So I think that's that real power to ourselves as elected members, but also the public, the residents, to challenge because we've adopted this duty and that can refer back to it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Donaghy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you listen to Sunderland Labour, before 2010, you think the streets of Sunderland were laid with gold under Tony Blair, when they weren't. Why wait till now, and I quote, to provide leadership and reduce inequalities when Labour have controlled the council for 50 years? In this motion, you note deprivation and poverty, but if you take a quick look at that, the dictionary defines deprivation as areas where people haven't got the things that people consider to be essential in life. For example, acceptable living conditions, education and local infrastructure. Who's controlled and influenced the living conditions, schools and infrastructure in the city of Sunderland for the last 50 years? Anybody? Exactly. I'll get to you in a minute. The definition of poverty is given as households with an income of less than 60% of the UK average. The UK average being 29,600 as of last year. That means families earning 17,700 or less are defined as living in poverty. Carefully planned development and encouragement and investment in our city centre will provide more jobs. The people of Sunderland would rather have the basics done properly than new bridges and vanity projects. In summary, this motion is an empty gesture to blame the Tories for Sunderland's own problems. All you've done is admit that you have failed the people of Sunderland for decade after decade after decade. The motion is nothing more than a desperate attempt by this failing Labour-led council to take cheap shots at the government, aimed to deflect from your own failings across the city. You have had numerous chances and millions from central government that could have and should have been used to address these issues, but you haven't. Sunderland's Labour answer is to always throw more money and more money and more money. Money does not solve weak leadership, no matter how much you try to increase your own salary and your own expenses. I welcome the Liberal Democrat amendment of adding the 6 monthly check-ups to keep this Labour Council in check. However, we will not be voting in favour of the amendment. The problem is not with the Conservative government, the problem is with this Labour Council. You say that Labour works. You say that Labour works. At very best, Labour works for itself. It certainly does not work for the people of Sunderland or the people of Washington.
Councillors, just hold on a moment. Councillors, let them finish. You can go back a sentence if you wish so and pick up your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I reiterate, you say Labour works, it works for itself, not for the people of Sunderland, and certainly not for the people of Washington. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Leader, you wish to reply, respond?
Excuse me, point of order, Mr. Mayor. I did put the name up. I did put my hand up to speak.
Sorry, we didn't catch it. If you can hang on, Leader. Yes, Councillor Williams.
Wow. Right. Councillor Hodgson, I really do appreciate the way you put forward the amendment there. I think you were very thoughtful. I think you brought some very positive things there, and it is right that we strengthen. And I do like the part about the protected characteristics as well. Councillor Morrissey, as Councillor Stewart said, I did think, oh my God, he's woken up. What are we doing here? Life was tough in the 80s. It's similarly tough now, and that's because of Tory-led policy, which doesn't help those people who live in austerity. But similarly, you can't brush away the part that your party have had in national government over the last 10 years in coalition with the Tories. So I think you need to watch your own backyard before you start shouting at everybody else. It also has been pointed out tonight that you have voted as a group against some of the proposals we've come up with as a Labour Party. So I think, you know, we've all probably got a little bit to look at ourselves, but let's address what the problem is here. Let's not play party politics with it. Let's get this right for our residents. That's what we're here for. We live in a society that treats many of us less favourably than others. Many of these cases, that favourability aspect is a political choice, and that's austerity. Whenever there are budget cuts, the largest impact often falls on those who are disabled, socially isolated, live in poorer housing, or excluded from mainstream society, in fact are just sometimes poorer. Poverty is cruel and wavering, and often the result of compounding situations, such as a job loss that can happen to any single one of us. Illness, disability, again, you can walk out here, be run over by a bus, and you're disabled for the rest of your life. Family circumstances all make a change on the vulnerability of you and your families. Since 2010, the government's decimated funding to public services. The outcome is an inability for partners to offer the services which are valued by all of us, but impact more on our vulnerable residents. Council funding's been hammered. We've lost over it's over 2/3 of our funding, isn't it? I'm looking at it the wrong way. Police funding, fire and rescue funding, and NHS funding have all been slashed. They've been repurposed, removed and realigned. You can badge any money up under another title. The result leaves public services trying to deliver, but with little certainty on budgets, staffing levels struggling under pressure, and unable to maintain presence in our communities, we move into disaffection. Rising numbers of crime, that leads to drug and alcohol abuse, domestic violence, and general misery. And as I say, have we learned nothing from the 80s? Civil unrest, I remember marches, disrupted services, and cars on fire. It was vile. We must demand fair, adequate funding to address the current situation. We must enact Section 1 of the Equalities Act to support our society to flourish, not write off a huge swathe of our community for being vulnerable. One of my favourite books is Animal Farm. Fantastic representation of this government at the moment. So we've got Napoleon with his cabinet in 10 Downing Street. Not a care for anyone outside his circle. Just in case you don't know, Animal Farm was about farm animals who got together to chase the farmer away because he was cruel and uncaring. They were all going to live in a happy society, but as time turned on, the pigs took over, turning eventually into humans. Napoleon, yeah, our leader. With the... Sorry? No, I meant our... Councillors. I know you think it's funny, but I did mean Mr. Johnson. Napoleon. Shame, isn't it? But never mind. So, Napoleon's line of explaining this whole change was, some pigs are more equal than others, but all pigs are equal. Actually, that was just a justification to himself, but we all know what it was. That book was written in 1945. Not a lot's changed, has it? So we'll move to the present day. And just after questions tonight, following questions on the Festival of Light, I understand...
Councillor Williams, the 5 minutes is up.
Oh, Okay, right.
You can wind up. Everyone else has had their opportunity.
Okay, I will do that. I'm just disappointed to see in the Tory manifesto that they're talking about events which don't make a profit or are not sponsored won't go ahead. I think that's a real nightmare. Thinking of the Aldi advert, Ebenezer Scrooges over here, the Marcus Radisfords are here. Thank you.
Thank you. Leader, you have the right to reply. Oh, sorry, Leader. I'm going to have you up and down like a yo-yo.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor?
Councillor Donaghy. Yes, he spoke when you know.
Oh, sorry.
Tough information. We're okay. We'll get it in a minute. Councillor Leader, you're right to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Williams, see me afterwards. Now, I do want to thank Councillor Hodson for catching me at the start, before the start of the meeting, to tell me that he was wanting to move an amendment to our notice of motion so that we could quickly see where it went. And I was more than happy, as Councillor Stewart has said, to support the amendment because it actually changed a couple of words which did make it stronger. So thank you for that, Councillor Hodson. It is amazing what we can do when we're civil and work well with each other. But I will say that you spoilt it right at the very end with your lip service to equality, to the party who brought the Equality Act in. Just not going to be lectured on it, I'm afraid. At the end of the day, we strongly support equality and we would never pay lip service to it. So please, no, it wasn't necessary. Councillor Morrissey, your party's voted against every proposal we've brought forward in the last 4 years to help deal with the social pressures in this city. You've voted against the £1 million to help hard-pressed families. You've voted against everything that we've done. So please don't try and lecture us on the Labour Party's done nothing. The only people doing anything in this city are the Labour Party, because if we left it to you and the Conservatives across the room, nothing would get done, because you won't support anything that involves working with the people that we all represent. And other than that, it was okay. Right? However, Councillor Donaghy, if you don't understand that this is how the magic money tree works, right, which apparently the Tories have but nobody else can get to. Boris shakes the tree, or Theresa May or David Cameron, whoever, over the last 11 years. Money falls and it goes to the DUP because they've bought their votes to support them in Parliament. So there's 1.6 billion to Northern Ireland, which everybody else paid for, right? But it got the Tories a narrow majority to help them sort out their coalition with the Liberal Democrats. That then introduced 11 years of Osbornomics austerity politics, which we're still working with today. And this council has had its budget reduced by £315 million since 2010. And that's £315 million that the Tories primarily, but the Lib Dems started it by going into coalition with them. That's £315 million that have been taken out of Sunderland people's hands and mouths. Right?
Yes, it did.
The magic money tree seems to have no problem giving money into the COVID business, where £37 billion was wasted on PPE contracts and work being done by companies that couldn't deliver. And once again, the people of the UK are paying for it because we'll have to pay for that out of our taxes. Never mind the billions that were given fast-tracked to their mates, which only, 10 Tories had the ability to do that. But this is money, right? And when you're looking at the real living wage, this Labour group have brought the number of people earning below the real living wage down to 16%, which is the lowest it's ever been, and it continues to fall, and it puts Sunderland in England at the top of the chart for dealing with wage inequality at a time when we've got a government that's pushing the cost of business onto the working poor. And Councillor Donaghy, do you know what's not acceptable to Washington residents? I'll tell you what's not acceptable to Washington residents. The Tory party taking £315 million out of our budget that pays for all the services that people don't get now. So how many potholes could we have had filled? How many bins could we have had emptied and replaced? How much better could we have made the parks? How much better could we have made the whole infrastructure of the city and the 3 towns that make it up? Right? That's what's unacceptable to Washington residents, or to Coalfield residents, or to Sunderland residents. Your government continuing to decide that billionaires and bankers get bonuses and tax breaks, and we're going to hit everybody in Sunderland with a national insurance rise in April, allied to a cost of living rise on fuel, food, inflation, and everything goes with it, caused by your mismanagement of the economy. That's what's unacceptable to Washington residents.
5 minutes is up, Leader.
Mr. Mayor, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, let's be clear where we are. We need now to vote on the amendment. No. This is on the amendment, Councillor. Yep, fine. So we need to get this amendment voted on. I'm more than happy to take a show of hands. Right? Those for the amendment. Those against the amendment. Right. The amendment now becomes the new substantive motion, and if we have it correct on the screen, I'll take you through it, if my voice holds up. This council notes that since 2010, successive Conservatives-led government have failed to address inequalities in society, noting that levels of deprivation and poverty have significantly increased despite the introduction of the 2010 Equality Act. Continually refused to enact Section 1 of the Equality Act that would place a legal duty on governments to address these inequalities and reverse this rise in poverty and deprivation. We'll just wait for the screen to change. It's changed. This council now requires to further provide leadership in supporting struggling families in this city, and therefore resolves, with immediate effect, to voluntarily adopt the social economic duty as stated in Section 1 of the Equality Act 2010, which Conservative-led governments have refused to enact, to ensure strategic decisions are designed to reduce and/or mitigate the inequalities of outcomes which result from disadvantage. That is, adopting this duty, the Council will incorporate poverty and socio-economic disadvantages into equally impacted assessments, equality plans and the wider decision-making process and all strategic planning. Use a range of quantitatives and qualitatives data to inform the implementation of this duty and develop clear success criteria to measure the impact in reducing levels of inequality. Recognise the value of engaging with struggling families directly impacted by these inequalities, working together to find new and sustainable ways to support them and reduce poverty. In addition, work with stakeholders and voluntary communities, sectors, organisations to build awareness and understanding of this new duty adopted by this Council. Receive reports on a six-monthly basis on progress in achieving clearly defined and actionable targets both for this new duty and for the 9 existing protected characteristics defined in the Equality Act of 2010. Thank you. We now move to the next part.
14.23, that the question be put to the council, please. Can we move on to the question, the vote?
Can I just ask the Leader of the Conservatives, do you still wish to put an amendment?
We do, Mr. Mayor, and we intend to be very brief, but of course it's at your discretion.
Then I will be listening to the amendment from the opposition. I understand Councillor Hartnack wishes to move an amendment. Can I ask you now to read it out?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the heading, remove government failure to reduce and replace it with addressing issues of inequality across Sunderland. Remove everything from this council notes, including both bullet points, followed by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation shows that at present in England, childhood poverty, pension poverty, low-income household inequality and working-age adult poverty are all lower than they were at their peak under the last Labour government. At bullet point 3, to remove that Conservative-led government refused to enact. The rest all to remain, other than at the very end to include, this council regrets the increases in council tax which the Chief Finance Officer has previously noted could disadvantage those on low incomes in his equality impact assessments of Labour's budgets. Do you want me to read out what
No, I need a seconder first. Councillor Dole, do you second that?
I second the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hartnack, you can carry on. You can speak to the amendment.
So, do you want me to read out the full amendment, Mr. Mayor?
If you wish to, if that's part of your speech.
Okay, no, I'll miss that.
Mr. Mayor, in the interest of time, it might be prudent to just progress on to the speeches, unless you want us to read out the motion as noted.
Just going to speakers.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I need to begin with a correction. At the last 2 meetings of Council, we've mocked the Labour group for proposing to write letters saying that this was an indication of their lack of ideas and ambition. Since then, we've since learned that the previous 2 motions brought to Council by Labour were not written here in Sunderland, but handed down, like the 10 Commandments, to Labour groups across the country, and that identical motions have been debated in Bradford, Bury and Trafford, to name but a few. So the Conservative group was right that it indicated the lack of ideas. We were just wrong about the extent to which that was true. This motion, I suspect, is also a nationally produced template, and the amended version similarly, that colleagues in Sunderland have adopted as their own. But what is it? It's deceptive. There's a concerted effort in this motion to see 2010 as the year zero of all the world's ills, framed oddly around the introduction of the Equality Act in the dying days of the last Labour government, with no consideration whatsoever of what was happening prior to 2010. There are 2 points to be made about this, Mr. Mayor, which our amendment helps to correct. First, there's a subtle admission within this motion that none of the bullet points here require the government to have taken any action. The council did not need to be told to do this by government, as the motion says, It can all be done voluntarily. But that begs the question, why has our Labour Council not done this at any point over the past 11 years? This, Mr Mayor, is the theme of Labour's contribution to full council over the last few months, asking for permission to do things that they could have just got on with, but which they haven't done. They can't be that bothered if this has taken them 11 years to get round to thinking perhaps we should just do these things without being compelled to by government, and when it's occurred to them after a decade that they should do it, rather than just doing it, they've waited for a council meeting to talk about it first. So with this comes an admission of guilt on behalf of Labour's leadership locally that they've had more than 10 years to do this voluntarily, but only bothered to do so now. But why the delay? We support them in doing these things. The bullet points outlining the actions they want to take are all perfectly reasonable. But the leader of the council didn't need to ask for our permission to get on with doing them. After all, he's got another 5 months before the people of Washington South have their say on his record. Well, at least we assume that it'll be Washington South. But if we support them, then why amend it? The reason is this. The motion is historically illiterate. The insertion of 2010 as a starting point for our consideration is artificial. These problems didn't begin in 2010, and they haven't been at their worst by modern standards since 2010. As the Child Poverty Action Group points out, child poverty in the UK got worse from 2005 onwards, and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation shows that disparities in household income were at their worst under Gordon Brown, and in fact, most measures of poverty in England have remained relatively stable, unlike the increases in the percentage of people in poverty in Wales, where Labour is in government. In the North East, where there has been an increase in pressure on household incomes, the University of Loughborough's Centre for Research and Social Policy attributes this to a hike in housing costs, something which can only be addressed properly and in the long term through planning, reform, which Labour opposes, but which will be helped in the short term by the recent increase in the minimum wage and adjustments to the taper rate once post-pandemic inflation returns to pre-pandemic levels. I'd have thought the leaders of Labour in Sunderland, who still carry the flame of Corbynism, would have had no issue at all pointing out the flaws of New Labour, but for some reason their motion doesn't even acknowledge that there was a world before 2010. What this amendment reflects also is that locally it's Labour that has supported council tax increases in Sunderland. Both the Conservatives and the Lib Dems have demonstrated year on year different ways to pass a budget without raising council tax to the maximum legal limit. But I'll end with this, Mr Mayor. Pass as many motions condemning the government as you like. It won't change the fact that you've lost over 20 council seats in the last 4 years. It won't change the fact that our 3 parliamentary constituencies are marginals, and it won't help you win back Pallion and St Anne's. We raised earlier in this meeting the mistreatment and degrading working conditions of members of staff employed here in Sunderland.
Councillor, the 5 minutes is up.
I'm finished. Maybe the next motion can remedy the problems closer to home, for which the council they run is entirely responsible. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Doyle.
Pleased to know Councillor Hartnack has said out everything that I think our group wishes to say, Mr Mayor. All I want to say is really to offer a sincere apology to the Labour group and to the Lib Dem group. I thought that they had been given prior notice of the amendment just prior to the meeting. That was an oversight. I'm very sorry about that, but hopefully Councillor Hartnack's speech and the prior notice I gave you just as we were taking the vote has given you enough time to gather your thoughts. So sorry about that, and thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak to the amendment?
The leader has the right of reply on the amendment, Mr Mayor. And nobody else is indicating that they wish to speak. Oh, sorry, Councillor Stewart.
Hodson.
Councillor Hodson. So, Mr Mayor, that's Councillor Stewart, Councillor Hodson, and then the leader has the right of reply on the amendment.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's amazing what you can do with statistics. So a very quick look on the internet. I think we need to keep the proposed new motion with regards to condemning the Conservatives. And I mean, I'll give you some examples in relation to child poverty. This is the statistics I've got here. Since 2010, after the Labour government unfortunately fell, the number of children growing up in relative poverty has increased by 500,000 according to these statistics. Child deprivation has increased by nearly 50% since 2010. In-work poverty has increased by 1.5 million since 2010. Wages. The new analysis shows that wage stagnation under the Tories has cost the average worker around £6,500 in lost wages. Disposable income. The pay freeze that those of us in the public sector should declare an interest in pay freeze that we've been having, combined with deep cuts in social security, has cut growth in household disposable income by an average of £1,000 a year. Food banks, over the last 5 years, 65 million meals have been served in food banks, and that's an eternal shame on you lot. Right. Homelessness is doubled since 2010. Pensioner poverty, the leader mentioned earlier on the number of pensioners that's in poverty. I'll let him, if he wants to, raise that. And finally, disability poverty. According to this, well over 1 million individuals are in poverty because of their disability, because of your failure to enact Section 1 of the Equality Act. All down to you.
Councillor Hudson.
Thank you. My group will vote against the amendment.
Leader, you have the right reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. To put Councillor Hartnack straight, this motion is a Labour group proposal created by this Labour group who are full of ideas, and that's what really irritates the Conservatives across there, because they can see us getting stuff done across the city and we're delivering what people tell us that they're wanting delivered. Have to address the fact that Councillor Hartnack's trying to rewrite history regarding the Conservative Party and their record in government since 2010. The reason 2010 is quite an important date is that Rishi Sunak references it all the time. All the time. Everything that he had in his budget was about, since 2010, we've got to do this because things have got worse since 2010. Honestly, like he'd completely forgotten that the party in government since 2010 has been the Conservative Party. And all he's trying to do now with Boris is unpick the damage they've done to society, to unpick the damage they've done to people the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. So, lo and behold, they're putting some money back into the NHS. But it's not equal to the money they've taken out. They're now going to basically get more doctors and nurses. Who'd have thought you could get more doctors and nurses? Like the Labour Party did before 2010, when we introduced many thousands of doctors, many thousands of nurses, many thousands of teachers, 250,000 teaching assistants to uplift education. Remember Tony Blair saying, education, education, education? Well, we actually delivered it, and you lot dismantled it, and you should be ashamed of your party for that. We've seen the Tory government rip the guts out of the police and the fire service. Right? Lo and behold, Boris, we're going to put 20,000 police officers back into the police. Well, you took 22,000 out. So we're still down. And when people complain about the fact that they don't see police in this city, it's because of the Tory party getting rid of them all. And let's not forget the latest classic from a Tory party who've actually all turned into Jeremy Corbyn, because you're following his manifesto from 2017 to the letter. You're even introducing Sure Start centres. Oh, lo and behold, we dismantled all of that and got rid of it all and put a huge pressure on the working poor because they had nowhere to send their kids. So, you know what, to get them all back to work, we better give them somewhere to put their kids. You lot are insane in government. This is why you've got massive debt, much, much bigger than the Labour Party's ever had. Silence about that, though. What's it like having been the government in charge of a £2 trillion debt? Right? When we handed over to you in 2010, it was 800 billion. And the economy was growing. That would have been it, but yes, but you know what we had then, Councillor Wood? We had a global economic crash caused by your favourite people, the bankers. And what did this country do? This country bailed them out. We bailed them out and we didn't take any money from the end of it. And what are they doing? They're doing it again. And what is the reward from the Tory government? We'll give bankers a bailout. We'll give them a tax break. Let's give them a £4 billion tax break and we'll just take that money out of the working poor with a national insurance rise. That's what annoys people in Sunderland. That's what annoys people everywhere.
Sorry,
Michael.
Yes.
I just want to ask one question. Why do Labour keep losing?
Councillor Dixon, I'll give you chapter and verse on politics and how it's cyclical anytime you want. We all win and we all lose and it comes round. But it's a nice little point to make. However, your party are genuinely heading for a massive fall. Right? Just look at the sleaze, the corruption.
Point of order.
Oh, Niall. Councillor Hodson, I'm depressed. But you want to cut me short. I will, in fact, leave it there then, Mr Mayor. I think I've made the point, and I will cede to Councillor Hodson's request.
At this point, we need to take a vote on the amendment. And again, I'm more than happy with a show of hands. Those for the amendment. Those against the amendment. The amendment is defeated. Does any member wish to comment on the substantive motion? Councillor Ali? Yeah, we are back to what was actually amended by the Liberals. Yes, certainly.
Mr Mayor, on a point of order, can we 14.23 and the question now be put, please?
I think this gentleman, this councillor, should be allowed to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to start by saying I'd like to have spoken earlier because I'd wrote this out based on the original motion that Councillor Miller had brought, so that's why I was just clearing up any clarifications that was on the substantive one.
Sorry, let the councillor speak.
Is that the Labour lot trying to bully me? What's going on here? Can I start now? Is that all right?
Carry on.
Okay. It's hard to disagree with the thrust of this motion, and that's my problem with it. You see, it's hard to disagree with a lot of hot air. Of course, I want to reduce poverty, and I want to help people overcome social economic disadvantages. That's why I got involved in local politics, and it's why I've personally spent time getting to know residents who are struggling and help them however I can, whether it's giving advice or getting them practical things like food parcels. I've donated to my councillor's allowance to charity to make a real difference to people's lives. So you'll have to forgive me if I'm a bit suspicious of the idea that we can transform lives by passing fine-sounding council motions, as if adopting a formal duty to tackle inequality is the same as actually dealing with the problem. After all, we're dealing with a Labour council that has claimed there are no homeless people in Sunderland. This is the triumph of fantasy politics over reality. So perhaps we should pass a motion abolishing poverty in Sunderland or adopt a duty to fix all our problems by waving a magic wand. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not real politics, it's sheer virtue signalling. This is about the Labour group giving the appearance of caring, trying to score cheap votes using fine words, instead of doing the hard work on the ground to make a genuine difference. Once again, I don't disagree with a lot of what was in the motion. Of course, we should be doing everything we can to tackle inequality and reduce poverty. That's what local councillors are here for, and that's my point. This motion seems to be designed to get a pat on the back, or likes or retweets on social media for simply doing our job as councillors. Well, that's not why I became a councillor, and I'm not impressed by this political showboating. So, as a plain-speaking Conservative, I feel duly bound to say that this motion is all mouth and no trousers. On that note, I know some people said that after the last meeting that they weren't happy about my tone, but I'm not going to apologise for that, because the tone I use is the tone I hear from the residents I'm here to represent. To conclude, I'm not going to oppose the motion, but I'm not fooled by it either. Let me just say, I'd like to hear a bit less of this kind of fine talk and see a bit more hard graft to make a real difference to our residents' lives. Excuse me? No,
Councillors.
Yeah, afterwards, but
Councillors.
this was prepared to speak on the substantive motion.
Come on.
So this is my theory on the substantive motion. Obviously, I have subsequently opposed it, but you know, you're all bark and no bite, and that's the problem.
Councillor Lee, 2 minutes. Now look, everyone in this room, because you've been elected by the people in your ward, have the right to stand up, take part in the debate, and within reason, say what you need to be said and be heard. Allow the councillor to finish, and then I would like to ask the leader if he would wish to respond to the councillor when you're finished. So carry on.
Well, I'm finished, and as I said, I was speaking to the original motion which I'd prepared for. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. Leader, would you wish to reply?
Just that, Councillor Ali, I appreciate the passion in your words, but there's no... My apologies. Sorry, Peter. No virtue signalling from the Labour Group. We mean what we say, we work hard to deliver on the ground every single day for the residents of this city, across this city. But I do accept the passion that you show in the words that you use, and I'm absolutely fine with that. But I will not accept the
Thank you. The debate is ended. We now need, we've already had a vote, and I'm sure we've agreed the motion which was amended by the Liberal Democrats. Can we agree? Agree. Thank you.
Can I have a vote, please, Mr. Mayor? I want a vote out on this.
You want a named vote? Have we got a seconder for that? Right. We'll conduct a named vote. Elaine, if you'll explain.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll call the name of each member in turn, and if they could indicate whether they are voting for, against or abstaining. Councillor Blackburn. Councillor Checker. Councillor Dodds. Councillor Essel. Councillor Farthing. Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Foster. Councillor E. Gibson. Councillor Peter Gibson. Councillor Hurren. Councillor Johnston. Councillor Loughlin. Councillor Laws. Is Councillor Doris McKnight here? No. Councillor Neil McKnight. Councillor Mason Gage. Councillor McLennan. Councillor F. Miller. Councillor G. Miller. Councillor Price. Councillor Roundtree. Councillor Samuels. Councillor Scanlon. Councillor Scott. Councillor A. Smith. Councillor P. Smith. Councillor D. Snowden. Councillor D. E. Snowden. Councillor Spedding. Councillor Stewart. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Thornton. Councillor D. Truman. Councillor H. Truman. Councillor Ty. Councillor M. Walker. Councillor Warren. Councillor Williams. Councillor Wilson. Councillor Ali. Councillor Blackett. Councillor Bernicle. Councillor Dixon. Councillor Donaghy. Councillor Doyle. Councillor Dunn. Councillor Greener. Councillor Hartnack. Councillor Howe. Councillor Johnston. Councillor Leadbitter. Councillor Leadbitter. Thank you. Councillor Mann. Councillor McKeith. Councillor Peacock. Councillor Reid. Councillor Wood. Councillor Crosby. Councillor Edgeworth. Councillor Fagan. Councillor Paul Gibson. Councillor Haswell. Councillor Hodson. Councillor Morrissey. Councillor Nicholson. Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Potts. Councillor G. Smith. Councillor A. Wood. Councillor Buick. Councillor Jenkins. Could I just check, have all members present voted? So, Mr. Mayor, that is 51, I think it is, votes in favour and 17 votes against, and so the motion is agreed.
Thank you. Right, we now move on to deal with the notice of motion, which is on the subject of automated external defibrillators. Yes?
Just bearing in mind that it's 4 minutes to 7 and we're planning to finish at 7, can I move that this motion be put directly to the vote?
Have you a seconder? Is that agreed?
It's in front of everyone's got it in front of them. If they're happy, we'll go straight to a vote without speeches.
We've had a proposal and a seconder to put this straight to the vote. Is that agreed? Councillor Dixon. 2 minutes. Councillor Miller.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to, but we've got an amendment, so we need to do the amendment.
Yeah, we need to discuss it. Need to discuss it, Councillor. Can I call upon Councillor Crosby to read and move the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that Council notes that on average 30,000 people each year suffer a sudden cardiac arrest outside hospital, and 20% of these incidents occur in public spaces. Council further notes only 10% of victims of cardiac arrest survive when the incident occurs outside hospital. Automatic external defibrillators can play a significant role in saving the lives of people who suffer heart attacks in public. It is estimated that the shock from an AED alongside CPR treatment increases survival rates to 75 to 80%. Council notes that, although there are public defibrillators in various places across the city, including some council premises and assets, there are gaps in the provision of publicly accessible AEDs, and at present there is no holistic mapping system listing all AEDs across Sunderland, Washington, Houghton and Hetton. Therefore, Council agrees to compile and maintain a list and an interactive map of all public defibrillators in the Sunderland City Council area, including those in non-council premises. Review and, where appropriate, increase the provision of defibrillators across all council-owned spaces, including public parks, community centres, leisure centres and areas of high public footfall. Bring a report to Health and Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee no later than February 2022, detailing a plan to roll out more automatic external defibrillators across the city and to produce and maintain a fully interactive mapping system to locate all public defibrillators in the Sunderland City Council area. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson, do you second the motion?
I'm going to have to leave the meeting before this can be debated fully, so can I invite a member of my group to second the motion? Am I staying? In case it needs to happen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you second the motion? We'll make a note of that. By my watch, we've actually reached the end of the time which was allotted to these meetings at a previous council meeting. So, it's also given that the chairman of the meeting will decide if an extension is to be given. On this occasion, I intend to extend this meeting by half an hour. 7:30 will be the end of this meeting. So we've had a seconder to this motion. Councillor Crosby, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I became interested in Sunderland defibrillators where they were all around the city because my father had a rare heart condition which eventually resulted in him having open heart surgery at the Freeman Hospital. It extended his life by about 5 years. So I got into the habit of always liking to know where they were around the city in case my dad needed them. You'll be pleased to know there's one actually in this building that was used not so long ago to save the life of a 94-year-old supporter during a football match. So last month I typed defibrillator into the council website and it said 0 responses. So I asked the council officer where on council property were there any defibrillators, and I was told that there were 3. 2 in the Civic Centre and 1 in the Hetton Centre. Now, when my dad was alive, I made the same request as a Freedom of Information request, and I was told then that there were 14 council defibrillators. So I was puzzled as to what had happened in the meantime. So I discussed it with the council officer, and it turned out that the leisure properties that are now under everyone active control, he hadn't counted those. And he hadn't counted the ones in the Leachmere Centre, and he didn't realise there were any more. So we found at least a few more in Jack Crawford House, the City Library, and the Thorny Close Enterprise Centre. The one in Seaburn had disappeared with the disappearance of the Leisure Centre. Even if the council officers don't know where all of the defibrillators are, what chance have the rest of us got? So I decided that I would bring a motion to council, firstly, to make it easier for people to locate their nearest machine. It would be very helpful to have a list on the council website. The ambulance service does maintain a map of some defibrillators, but none of the council or school defibrillators appears on this map. And the leisure centres, they aren't on the ambulance service map either. So the council might considering liaising with the ambulance service to give them a bit more extra information, as well as having something on your website to help people find them. One of the functions of the council is surely to serve the needs of its residents. So this is an easy request, just a few hours of a council officer's time and some regular updates to try and improve the situation. Secondly, mapping defibrillator locations will show up any deficiencies. So, for instance, if you look at the ambulance service map, there is nothing at all in Ryop. People in that area might be a bit, if they're in trouble, what they're going to do. In saving lives, speed is of the essence. We've all been seeing on the telly at the moment that the ambulance service is grossly overstretched at the moment. And if you've had a heart attack, every minute counts. So if you could type into your phone, where is a defibrillator, and the council could help you with that, well, surely it's a great thing for the council to do. I'll remind you of how useful these machines are. If you were watching the football a couple of months ago and a young football player collapsed on the pitch, and then about a month ago there was somebody in Newcastle during one of their matches, and a supporter collapsed in the crowd, and you saw the pictures of them rushing the machine over to try and help him. fortunately successfully. We need to know whether we need to place machines anywhere else in Sunderland where coverage is poor. I know, for example, that many leisure groups selflessly loaned their defibrillators to the NHS during the pandemic. I don't know if they've got them all back yet, so perhaps we need to give them a bit of support there. Thirdly, as part of this motion, I'd like a coordinated action plan for future provision of defibrillator machines in the whole city, with the Health Scrutiny Committee making plans for additional machines, replacing worn-out machines, or sadly, one or two of them get vandalised sometimes, and that's an expensive replacement. They cost about £1,000, I think. So we also need to invest in publicising where these things can be found for people, to members of the public, and indeed to council staff, with regular updates as necessary. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Edgeworth, I don't know whether you reserve the right to speak. Do you wish to speak now?
I'll speak now, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for the extension, and thanks to Councillor Crosby for moving a great motion. It's close to my heart as well. My father passed away of a heart attack whilst playing football at Crowtree Leisure Centre, so I think the more defibrillators we can get, and as Meg said, to add to what the ambulance service map already provides, and provide a real comprehensive system of defibrillators and increase them where possible would be really welcome. So I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you. Deputy Leader, I understand you wish to move an amendment.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to change the third paragraph after Washington, delete Horton and Hetton and add Coalfield. And bullet points, delete first bullet point, final bullet point, delete from the word city, add new bullet point, ensure all current and future defibrillators on council land and property are registered with the National Defibrillator Network, which is supported by the British Heart Foundation, the Association of Ambulance Chief Executive, Resuscitation Council UK and St John's Ambulance. Council notes that the amended motion would read as follows. Council notes that on average 30,000 people each year suffer a sudden cardiac arrest outside of hospital, and 20% of these incidents occur in public places. Council further notes only 10% of victims of cardiac arrest survive when the incident occurs outside hospital. Automated external defibrillators, AEDs, can play a significant role in saving the lives of people who suffer heart attacks in public. It is estimated that a shock from an AED alongside CPR treatment increases survival rates to as I think it rates from 75 to 80%. Council notes that though there are public defibrillators in various places across the city, including some council premises and assets, there are gaps in the provision of publicly accessible AEDs, and at present there is no holistic mapping system listing all AEDs across Sunderland, Washington and Coalfield. Therefore, Council agrees to review and, where appropriate, increase the provision of defibrillators across all council-owned spaces, including public parks, community centres, leisure centres and areas of high public footfall. Bring a report to Health and Scrutiny Committee no later than February 2022, detailing a plan to roll out more automated external defibrillators across the city. Ensure all current and future defibrillators on council land and property are registered with the National Defibrillator Network, which is supported by the British Heart Foundation, the Association of Ambulance Chief Executive, Resuscitation Council UK and St John's Ambulance.
Thank you very much. Councillor Johnson, I understand you're seconding this. Thank you very much. Deputy Leader, would you like to speak to it, to the amendment?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just very briefly, because I'm conscious of time. The Labour Group supports the main element of the motion, which is to increase defibrillators and provide a plan to the Health and Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee, and this is certainly, of course, commendable. The initial part of the amendment was needed to include the whole Coalfield. As most members are aware, the Coalfield area is more than Horton and Hetton. and the Lib Dem wording fails to include substantial parts of the coalfield area, such as Shiny Row and Copt Hill. So that was the rationale behind that. We made the second part of the amendment to recognise that the current North East Ambulance Service NHS Foundation Trust database is to be replaced by a national database called the Circuit, the National Defibrillator Network, which is supported by the British Heart Foundation, the Association of Ambulance Chief Executives, Resuscitation Council UK and St John's Ambulance. All defibrillators should be registered on the circuit to ensure that they can continue to direct members of the public to defibrillators in an emergency. Our amendment requires the Council to register defibrillators here. I'm sure that the Liberal Democrats will consider these amendments reasonable and give their support. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much. I understand Councillor Checker has indicated you would like to speak on the amendment, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Just before you start, can I just check anyone else wish to speak on the amendment? I'll just get these names, Councillor.
Councillor Ty, Councillor Buick. On the main motion. Councillor Harknack. Councillor Dixon. On the main motion, not on the amendment. Councillor Neil McKnight. So, Mr Mayor, the speakers just on the amendment are Councillor Checker, Ty, Buick, Hartnack and Neil McKnight. Could I just check I haven't missed anybody who wants to speak on the amendment? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Carry on, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And actually, I think I probably wanted to speak on the amended motion, but am I okay to speak now? That's fine. And I would like to thank my colleagues in the Liberal Democrat group for bringing this motion to Council today. I think it is really important, so thank you. I would equally have supported them in my role as portfolio holder for Healthy City had they taken the time in advance of this motion to come and discuss it with me and the public health team. But nonetheless, I'm pleased that we're here today, and I do hope this discussion raises awareness of this important issue across the Council and across the City and enables me to shine a light on some of the excellent work happening both in the public health team and also within the voluntary and community sector across the City. If my colleagues in the Liberal Democrat group had come to me to discuss this, I would not only have supported them, but encouraged them to take this a step further. And rather than subject us to another amendment, I will speak on what I mean by that now and hope everyone in this room will take away a personal action on this. I think we all know about the North East Ambulance Service and the British Heart Foundation and the fantastic work that they do. I would like to discuss a local North East charity run by my friend and colleague Sergio Petrucci called the Red Sky Foundation. The Red Sky story started in 2015 when Sergio and Emma's daughter had successful life-saving open heart surgery at the Freeman Hospital. A year ago, Sergio and Emma organised the first Red Sky Ball, raising £64,000. That was just the beginning, and the Red Sky has now raised close to £500,000. The number of lives they have changed and helped save has been incredible, and since receiving full charitable status, they've done so much more. And this is where this motion could have grown in strength and impact. The Red Sky Foundation are self-funding education programmes into communities and schools across the city, showing the importance of early CPR and defibrillation to thousands of people from 4 to 96 years old. They're reaching a wide spectrum of society, but they want to do more. They won't just get you a device, they will do demonstrations, come in and meet community groups and local residents. They visit primary schools, secondary schools, and their passion for raising awareness is amazing. They have fitted over 60 defibrillators in the last 18 months across the North East. They've brought 2 scanners, a heart transplant unit, and they've supplied Sunderland Royal Hospital COVID wards with 23 defibrillators to help give patients the best chance of survival and so much more. The real Red Sky story is that with a little bit of hope and a lot of determination, anything is possible, and that can be our takeaway message from this debate today. Imagine how much more could be achieved by Red Sky and similar organisations. Not only do I support this motion, I ask every councillor in this room, every officer, every parent to speak to the schools that you're involved in and ask them what they are doing with the children to help them learn about how important this is. Get in touch with me or Sergio if you want any help with it. And for the councillors in this room, Your community chest and area committee funding could not be better spent than on defibrillators in your community. Mr Mayor, many conscientious businesses have invested in defibrillators and I applaud each and every one of them. But many of these locations are unknown outside of their own business and are not available for use by the public. I ask that each of these businesses also register their device with the National Defibrillator Network, aka the circuit, the centralised network, as described by my colleague Councillor Roundtree. This ensures easy access to them for all in an emergency. At the moment, many defibrillators never get used because emergency services don't know where they are or how to access them. This can cost lives, and that's why this infrastructure is so vital. Defibrillators are much more likely to be used if they are registered. I'm really pleased to announce that we will shortly have 2 new registered defibrillator devices installed in public spaces in the Southwick ward, which is where I represent and where I live. These will be going to Southwick Community Centre and Thompson Park. But Mr Mayor, this motion should be about so much more than just the equipment. A publication called Resuscitation to Recovery, published in March 27 by the Out of Hospital Cardiac Arrest Steering Group, showed that only 7 to 8% of patients survive a cardiac arrest in England, and just 30 to 40% of bystanders would intervene if they saw someone collapse. Improving this requires a multifaceted approach to public resuscitation awareness and confidence. What is also needed is a wider public awareness campaign of the signs of cardiac arrest and how to give CPR, along with the wider availability of defibrillators. The public health team in the council are working together with North East Ambulance Service on how we can improve awareness, training and confidence to use public access defibrillators in Sunderland. And I'm pleased to say that this also includes providing additional defibrillators in an area where they will have the most impact. It also takes into account changes in housing that is happening now and that is planned for the future. Mr Mayor, this motion means a lot to me personally and professionally as a mum, a nurse and a councillor. Mr Mayor, I know that you and many of us in the room will remember the day almost 10 years ago when my husband and Sunderland Echo sports writer Ian Laws finished playing football and collapsed. His heart stopped, and along with my 3 children, we called 999 immediately and started CPR.
5 minutes, councillors.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, I'm a trained and qualified nurse, fully up to date with my immediate life support training, but unfortunately, without the life-saving equipment on board, it took over 10 minutes for that ambulance to arrive, which, despite the best efforts at CPR, all I could offer was too late. What was needed was a life-saving defibrillator. Mr Mayor, I asked Sergio this week what his ambition for the city was, and he said a defibrillator device every 500 metres, and I think that's a fantastic target to aim for. Within 500 metres of my house, there is a pub, a metro station, a park, and 2 rows of shops. These are all the sorts of places a public defib could be, and these can be accessed in a much quicker time than it can sadly take an ambulance to arrive with that life-saving equipment. Every 500 metres is not an unachievable target, and I hope everyone in this room can help Sergio achieve that. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Can I just remind members of the time? We will finish at 7:30. If you've heard what you're going to speak, you've already heard it, then please, decline to speak. What I will do at 7:30, I think it's a very important issue. I will ask the people involved to approach the relevant cabinet members and officers to come to some conclusion on this, and maybe the leader would like to bring a report to the next council meeting. Well, we've got time yet to hear speakers who will put their hands up. If you've got somewhere to go, you have my permission to leave now. Councillor Tighe. Well, Councillor, I can't see taking a vote resolves a very important piece of council debate early. We'll do what we can. This room is booked after us. You realise that from the beginning. Councillor Tighe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And again, I just want to speak in support of the amended motion. And again, thank Councillor Crosby for fetching the first motion in the first place. We did have discussion about it at Labour Group, and it is something close to my heart also. We're extremely lucky in Silkstone. We actually have 7 defibrillators, of which a number of them I am a guardian for. But I think it was really important that we did stress specifically about not giving the city more responsibility when it comes to the maintenance of the list. The North East Ambulance Service, and again I'm involved with them quite frequently, because the ones that do get taken out from Silksworth are often they're taken away, and that's why we become guardians. And I know a number of my colleagues around here, probably on all sides to be fair, they'll be familiar with that. Again, colleagues are involved with us on the Wearside League. At the Wearside League, we actually provided defibrillators for every club within the league as well, and it is actually a requirement of them. But what started happening as more and more defibs became known and within communities is the responsibility on the ambulance service to try and maintain after that and keep up contact and the regular, someone has to go and clean it, they have to check the pads, they've got to check the batteries in date, and there's lots and lots of requirements. And to be fair, I think the circuit, the new idea, funded by the charities as well, and supported by the chief officers of the ambulance services across the country, is the way to go. Then you've got one central point of contact. They're going to make contact with us straight away. They're going to tell us if it's being used, if it's being taken, if it hasn't been used. They're also going to support us with pads, going to support us around batteries and things like that. And again, I think we'd all agree that the last thing we want to do is probably put more responsibility on the city with the finite amount of staff that we have got. If there's obviously another organisation going to do that across the country, I think that's all I would say in the interests of trying to get other people to speak. Mr. Mayor, thank you very much.
Councillor Buick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will keep this brief because I think most things have been said. With the motion, I would have voted for it, and the amendment. With what's been mentioned by Deputy Leader about the circuit of locating defibs, I think it's spot on, but if that doesn't come to fruition, I think the council should maybe look at an app for Sunderland residents where they can have on the phone locating where they all are. And just something what I picked up on people speaking there does seem to be a lack of awareness of where they are. Obviously, you all know I'm in the fire service, and all frontline fire appliances actually carry defibs, and they attach to the front of all fire stations in Tyne and Wear. I don't know if people were aware of that, so if you're anywhere near them or if a fire engine's passing you, wave them down. I've seen first-hand them getting used, and they're a cracking bit of kit, and they do save lives. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Hartner.
Mr. Mayor, I'll be very quick also, just to make one point that hasn't been raised, and that is that there are quite a number of defibrillators located at locations just beyond our boundaries. So in my own ward, there is a defibrillator about 30 metres away from Sunderland in South Tyneside, just to make sure that they're counted also, because it provides vital information and could save lives. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor McKnight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep this mercifully brief. I mean, I've not long ago raised enough resources to actually buy a defibrillator for our cricket club, which was Philadelphia. So, you know, I really wholeheartedly support this. I really commend Councillor Crosby bringing this tonight. I really sort of listened to her story intently, and I understand why she's brought it. Point I'd just like to raise, obviously we've raised the point about defibrillators, but I'd just like to take 1 second just to ask everybody, the members, the officers, just to take an hour at some point just to do some CPR training. So it is actually using defibrillator, using hands-on chest defibrillator, CPR. It's an hour, so just please take an hour out of your life to save a life. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson, do you wish to reply?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll wrap this up quite quickly, but again, just thankful to Councillor Crosby and the Liberal Democrats for bringing this motion to Council tonight. It's a great notice of motion to bring, and something I think that we can all get behind and support. Having worked in sport and leisure myself for the last sort of 15, 16 years, I've probably worked in many of those buildings where those existing defibs are now currently, and obviously never had to use one myself in terms of doing any first aid, but understand obviously the training that goes into it as well to give people the confidence when that sort of happens that they're comfortable and can react in a calm manner. So that might be something we can look at further down the line. Once the notice of motion is obviously acted upon, that could be something that we can progress on to in terms of, Councillor McKnight has already mentioned, the training and making sure people have got the confidence of using that defib when it becomes in that critical moments that could save a life. Also in my own ward, Coptill, I carried out the Miners Rescue Station first aid refresher training in the summer. There's already apps available to download, and that was one of the things the assessor told us to do straight away, and it's something he does wherever he goes in the country on a holiday, that he locates his DFib as soon as he arrives at his hotel or his location. He knows where his nearest DFib is as soon as he gets there. So that's just another sort of example where we could, people could act upon as well. And we've also used the community chest again in Coptill Ward at New Bottle Church Hall, which now has a DFib on the outside of the building. So again, I encourage members, that's a fantastic use of community chest funds to place those DFibs at the heart of our communities. And that's as much as I want to say, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Crosby, do you wish to make a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's lovely to hear about all of the different initiatives that have been taking part to get defibrillators, but all I would say is we need more publicity to know where they are, because at present a lot of us don't, and there's not an easy way of finding out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, members, we're going to vote on the amendment. Again, a show of hands.
Speak to the main motion.
You want to speak the main motion? We've got to deal with the amendment. Let's vote on the amendment. Can I have a show of hands for the amendment? No, I think that's carried. Right, thank you. No, I don't think so, no. Just to move on, we are now pushing for time. I don't intend to read out the new motion. I think you can all read, and I think it's acceptable, very important, and thank you all for debating the way you did it. Is there comment on the substantive motion now?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we had prior indication from Councillor Bernicle and also Councillor Dixon and Hartnack.
Councillor Bernicle first.
But
You can. I'll give you permission to speak. You can speak. But please make it brief.
And thank you to the Liberal Democrats. We at the Conservative Party are no strangers to the importance of defibrillators. This particular motion means a great deal to me personally. When I was 16, I had a cardiac arrest myself, and had it not been for my father Harry being there, at the time I would have most certainly died. Speaking of my father, he himself suffered from a heart attack and had surgery less than a month ago. He's thankfully recovering well now. Knowing that there are groups and charities and people out there pushing to have these EEDs installed, it's certainly welcoming for me and my family. I have no doubt this will bring reassurances to a lot of families across Sunderland. My company recently installed a defibrillator supplied by Red Sky Foundation down at Pallion Front Street. In my ward, we're currently in the process of assisting Red Sky Foundation with a community chest funding to install a defibrillator in the area. A resident of my ward named Carl Dongan and his football team of the Golden Fleece Football Club are also campaigning to raise funds at the for an EED to be installed at the Silksworth football pitches. And our candidate of the Silksworth ward, Jack Sim, is looking to assist with this also. To finish off, I'd just like to say that my colleagues and I support this motion wholeheartedly, which obviously we voted on. And please let it go on record. Please let it go on record that we have been supporters and contributors to this cause for some time. Thank you very much.
Councillor Dixon, do you wish a brief comment? Just 2 minutes. Point of order.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, it's just a question really relating to rules 8.2 and 8.3. Apologies, I'm just in the interest of time. Yes, rules 8.2 and 8.3
The meeting will finish at 7:30. I'm allowing a few moments now to get a few comments in, and I intend to wrap this one up. It's very important, and I'll take advice on what happens with the rest of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr.
Councillor Dixon.
How long have I got? 30 seconds. Could I just say I'm here to support the Liberal Democrat motion. I think it's great to bring great publicity to this issue, and whilst the amendment is fine too, I think the Liberal Democrats have managed to do that. We've got this as an issue now on the international scene. We've had Christian Eriksen with the football. We've had the chap who was ill at the Newcastle match, and of course ages before there was Fabrice Muamba for Bolton 2012. Could you stop talking, please? So this is, the more we talk about this, the better. And the good thing is, and along what Councillor Johnson said, we've got a group in St Michael's Ward, Blue Watch Youth Centre. We've started a new community centre there, or renamed community centre. And we've already got the young people talking about cake stalls and also sponsored walks to raise funds for this. And as councillors, we will be doing our best to support them. So I think the final message would be, as Councillor Johnson said, community chest, walk and talk funding, do all we can to help with this cause. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Can we agree the new substantive motion? Thank you very much. Will we get word out to members about the... Right, you'll get word about the rest of the agenda and what the intention is with that. Can I take this opportunity to wish you all the very best for Christmas. Have a lovely new year. Most of all, have a safe new year. And all the people watching tonight, have a safe new year and look after yourselves. Thank you very much.